Okay, I call to order the May 2023 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for those who are joining us by way of live stream and those attending in our boardroom by way of Zoom. So for those watching the live stream, you will note that we were back in the boardroom for today's meeting. The new upgrades will help to enhance our live stream meetings, which are a vital part of our commitment to transparency. As with any first use of technology, there might be some hiccups, and we appreciate everyone's patience if there are. So as a reminder again, for those sitting around the table, please make sure you are up to the table and that the mic is pointed toward your face when speaking. The mics are sensitive enough to pick up your voice from the distance. And first of all, I'd like to welcome our student representatives for today, Sarah Davis and Emily Gressbrink, both from the Twin Cities campus. Okay. So our first order of business is the President's recommended fiscal year 2024 annual capital improvement budget review. And our presenters for today will be President Joan Gable and Senior Vice President Myron Franz. So Mr. Franz, if you want to talk us through the budget, President Gable would like you to start us off.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. So as part of Board of Regents policy, the administration is directed to develop a capital budget with a 6-year time horizon that we update annually. This capital budget authorizes projects to begin design and construction during the upcoming fiscal year, and the fiscal year 2024 capital budget authorizes projects totaling over $636 million. Approximately 58% of this budget is state of Minnesota supported debt from the university's 2023 state capital request. The remaining 42% of the capital budget supports the university's share of state-supported projects as well as university-funded capital improvements. So members of the committee, this capital budget includes the university's full state capital request and will be updated in June to reflect the outcome of the 2023 legislative session. I want to thank Senior Vice President Franz and his team for their work in bringing this capital budget to you for review today. And with your permission, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you. Vice President Franz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Regents, and thank you for the team that put this together, as President Gable mentioned. So I'd like to start off looking at the schedule here. Just as a reminder, in terms of the process, last fall, this board reviewed the 6-year capital plan, which sets the priorities and direction of our ongoing academic and capital planning efforts. And also, last fall, the board approved the 2023 state capital request. That request has been made to the governor and the legislature for our state-supported capital projects, and that is currently under discussion at the legislature as we speak right now. I'll quickly give you a status of our update state capital request. So we submitted the university's board-approved request of $371.2 million to the governor last fall. Our request was for $200 million in higher education asset preservation and replacement, which we call HEAPR, plus funding for 5 specific projects across the system. Now, the governor included about $262 million of that in his capital investment recommendation to the legislature, and the governor's request included some funding for HEAPR and some for the Twin Cities Chemistry Project. The legislature, as I mentioned, is now negotiating those issues, and we'll find out by next Thursday. The legislature has now indicated they plan to adjourn on Thursday, May 18, instead of May 22nd. After the legislature concludes its work this next week, we will come back before this board in June with our updated capital recommendation for this next year based on in part what happened with the legislature. So there's always a lot of action between this review session today to review the annual capital improvement budget, and then in June we'll come back and ask you to take action on the budget based on what happened in the session. So let's go through a little bit here and talk about sort of the numbers involved. One of the things that we have right now in front of us is a $636 million capital improvement budget for fiscal year 24. That's made up, as I mentioned, the state capital request, which is a total of $483.9 million. $371 million would be from the state, and $112 million would be from matching funds from the University of Minnesota. The university-funded projects would remain $152.7 million. So that's how we come up with the $636 million annual capital improvement budget for this next year. If we go to the next slide, just give you a little background on how we come up with items for the annual capital improvement budget. First of all, it includes any individual projects that is over $1 million. The projects need to have completed a pre-design. They must be fully funded. In other words, we must understand and have a good sense of where the money will be coming from to fund the project. And the approved projects then move into a design and or construction once the board approves those. This particular, let me go back just a minute. This particular photo is of the Shepherd Labs. The Shepherd Labs on the Twin Cities campus includes $24.4 million to renovate floors 3, 4, and 5 for the Department of Computer Science and the College of Science and Engineering. This is a continuation of a building-wide renovation that's been underway in that building for several years. Now, if we go to the next slide and look at the capital projects, this is how we can give you an individual list of those projects that make up $384.9 million of this request. So this is $385 million, the HEAPR request is $200 million, and the repair and replacement items are about $51 million. We'll get to those in just a moment. So this shows you the capital projects that we're asking for approval. It includes projects from all over the Twin Cities and the other campuses. And what we'll do is, as I said, when we come back in June, we'll have this list. It'll either include those items that were passed by the legislature or not, and then we'll take them off that list. If you look at the next slide, these are the this describes a little bit more about the HEAPR funds that we asked for. We asked for $200 million, typically ask for about that much every legislative session, because that's the amount of money we believe as a system we need to maintain the infrastructure here at the university. We have a really large deferral backlog across the university. We have 32 million square feet of facility space. We have 900 buildings around the system, and they touch every part of the university. They have student experience, academic programs, research initiatives, and general competitiveness to attract students to our university. We have a large and diverse facility portfolio, but over 50% of the buildings are over 50 years old, which gives you a little sense of the need that we have for the ongoing HEAPR funds. 8.8 million square feet of this space is now considered to be in poor or critical condition. And this figure increases every year. So if you don't fix it this year, it's not going to get any better next year. HEAPR is the largest single source of funding available for making this, some might say mundane, but very vital capital improvements on the campuses and the buildings around the university. I simply cannot overstate the importance of this funding source for maintaining the safety and functionality of our campus. If you go to the next slide, you can see the repair and replacement pool. This gives you a sense of where we spend the almost $52 million. These kind of repair and replacement dollars come from the university's operating budget, and they're allocated on an annual basis. These funds are similar to HEAPR, but they're used to tackle more routine improvements, such as elevator upgrades, HVAC and mechanical equipment replacement, parking lot resurfacing, LED lighting conversion, and things like that. Projects within this pool can move up or down in priority based upon their criticality, their available funding, the cost efficiency that being gained from these projects, and other balances that might be remaining when other projects come under budget. So the last slide on the numbers, this shows you the potential additions to this capital annual improvement budget we might be recommending the next year. We often are in the process of reviewing many projects. Every year we have submitted to us a number of projects to be included that we need to go through the process and understand where the funding would come from, what would be the total cost. We want to make sure that you're aware of these items as they move through the process, but if they actually get approved, they'll come before this board to finally approve them and add them to the list. The last slide I think I have here, yes, is the capital budget by source. This shows you where the money is going to be coming from for the $636 million request. Obviously, we're hoping that we get the $371 million from the state. We have the institutional funds of $87.5 million. This is from our new $500 million interest-only bonds that we sold last year in 2022. This is helping us provide ongoing funding for capital projects at a very low interest rate. But you also see we bring in grants and gifts from outside the university, and the local funds represent those funds that come from the local colleges and departments that have put resources that they have available to these capital projects. I think one of the keys that we want to leave you all with is that this capital process is intensive. It requires a lot of effort, and we'll be coming to you periodically as we update this list. And as I said, in June, we'll come for the action on this item, and in September and October, we'll come to you to bring the recommended adjustments to the 6-year capital plan and our proposed state capital request for the 2024 legislative session. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Senior Vice President France. Does anyone have any discussion or questions? I will ask one. So the unfunded deferral, has that been accelerating, or has it been kind of leveling off, or where do you see that?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, one of the things that happens is that it tends to accelerate. For example, look at the Northrop Auditorium. The parapet walls I'll be talking about a little bit later on are over 100 years old. And so when that unusual winter occurred and the pressure was placed on those walls and one of them failed, it's an example of when you have 50% of your buildings that are over 50 years old, that you're going to have these kind of things happening fairly routinely and more often as they age. So I think one of the things that we hope that when we build new facilities and with new materials that they'll last longer and have less recurring problems. But right now we're seeing that this the critical and poor buildings continue to increase at an alarming rate, frankly.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, this is for review only, so we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item, our second item, is an update on the MPAC 2025 sustainability goals and highlights from the annual progress report on sustainability and energy efficiency targets and standards. Here to provide the updates are Chief Sustainability Officer Shane Stennis and Assistant Professor Heidi Roop. First, President Gabel, would you like to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. So climate is changing in Minnesota with effects across all aspects of our society and our economy. And we feel these impacts just as everyone else would across the U community and the communities that we serve. And we recognize that part of our mission is to research solutions and to transition our own economy to cleaner, safer technologies and approaches. So you'll hear in a few moments how we have reduced our own emissions by nearly half system-wide, and how in our work together we've committed through the MPAC 2025 strategic plan to establish next generation climate plans for each of our campuses and for the youth system by 2025. And you'll be hearing about that deliverable today for the Twin Cities campus. So we now have also established annual and system-wide sustainability convenings, and we've hired our inaugural Chief Sustainability Officer, Shane Stennis, who you'll hear from in just a few moments. We wanted to make sure we also added transparency and benchmarking to this work by committing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And since making that commitment, we've attained a number 5 national ranking around zero hunger and a number 2 national ranking around good health and well-being. We're also the first and so far only U.S. higher ed institution that's been invited to join the Aurora Network, which is a partnership of like-minded research-intensive universities globally who are focusing their academic excellence and measures to contribute to and benchmark against the Sustainable Development Goals. So in all of this work, we know our best way to have a positive impact is by leaning into our core mission, and we've elevated that through the call out in MPAC 2025 in Mintersections, where we commit to building a sustainable future. So members of the committee, it's because of these and countless other ways that we're hopeful and optimistic about the way the U is playing its role for our campus community, for all Minnesotans, and of course around the world. So at this time, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn it over to the team to continue the presentation.
Thank you, President Gabel.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the introduction by President Gable, and thank you, Chair Hipsch, and members of the board. We're really excited to be here to convey to you updates around sustainability across the system and to discuss with you current and future efforts around climate change. As the President noted in her opening remarks, in MPAC 2025, our system-wide strategic plan, we committed to a bold goal to build a fully sustainable future and identified 3 action items to advance that commitment and priority. Your docket materials include a system-wide annual report on sustainability that showcases work that's moving that goal forward. In addition, the work that's highlighted in the annual report also reinforces and advances the board's policy around sustainability and energy efficiency. The report that we're providing you does not represent the totality of work happening across the university, far from it. But what it is a collection of compelling stories that show how we're having impact, both on campus, across Minnesota, and around the world, that benefits our communities and our students and stakeholders. Across these categories of work and in the report, common themes emerge, including how we're integrating sustainability deeply into the learning experience for all students. Sustainability is sometimes perceived as the domain of only some disciplines, but as you will see in the report, through curricular and co-curricular activities, students from a wide variety of fields across all of our campuses, many majors, a variety of disciplines, are participating in sustainability and having meaningful experiences that advance their educational attainment and aspirations. And more work is underway to deepen and broaden that integration as the Twin Cities campus is considering changes to the core curriculum. Regarding research, in the report you will discover a number of examples of scholarship conducted and applied in service to communities in Minnesota and beyond. A third overarching theme concerns equity. We know that environmental and social degradation is disproportionately borne by BIPOC communities, by the poor, and the disenfranchised. Additionally, sustainability, like many other disciplines, has a history of racism and prejudice that it needs to address. In response, the university is listening to and learning from diverse communities and orienting our sustainability efforts to advance equity among these groups. Finally, across all of our sustainability work, the importance of the U's role in partnerships is evident. We are the hub that connects the private sector, government, communities, and civil society in novel collaborations that have transformational impact. I want to take a moment to highlight just 2 exciting examples of this. The first concerns the university's Sustainable Development Goals Initiative and uSpatial. They are working with Esri, the global geospatial software company, and other governmental and NGO partners here in Minnesota to advance implementation of sustainable development goals in communities here across the state. The second is the Midwest Carbon Leadership Project, which was launched this year out of the Institute on the Environment. The project is bringing together academics and the private sector to work on wicked problems and in the knowledge gaps around climate change solutions. To measure our success in sustainability, we're using 2 external measures. The president already hit on one, the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, and the other is the Sustainable Tracking Assessment Rating System, or STARS. Both are found on the university's progress card. The STARS platform measures performance across all facets of the university, and 3 campuses have already participated in this tool: Duluth, Morris, and the Twin Cities, receiving gold ratings. Rochester and Crookston will complete their assessments in the near term. In regard to the impact ranking measures, the president already highlighted some examples of how we're advancing those. We participated for the very first time in spring of 2022 as a system, and we were ranked really highly in Zero Hunger and Good Health. We resubmitted data this fall, and we expect new rankings by the end of May. Despite the success, we know continuing on our current trajectory will not be enough. Business as usual will fall short. In response, we have been building organizational capacity to achieve transformational change. This has included expanding opportunities for students to learn from one another and to lead initiatives through programs like Self-Sustain, Sustainability Corps, Clean Energy Leaders, and the Sustainability Expo. In addition, we've expanded the ability of our colleagues to contribute to advancing MPAC 2025 through awarding internal grants. Those grants foster projects that bring faculty, researchers, and staff in collaboration with external communities. Finally, we've established campus committees comprised of faculty, staff, and students to catalyze sustainability work. And at the same time, we brought together executive leaders from across the system to ideate and pursue innovative opportunities for system-wide impact. These are among the first of many moves to accelerate the pace of change and to do so at a scale that's commensurate with the issues we face. The last action that was identified in MPAC 2025 to support building a fully sustainable future is establishing climate action plans for the university, and the remainder of our presentation today will focus on this item. MPAC specifically calls out climate change as it is humanity's greatest challenge of the 21st century. A climate action plan articulates how the university and the institutional campuses will respond to the climate crisis, specifically in regard to its campus assets. And each campus in the system is developing a climate action plan. Today, we'll present the draft Twin Cities plan for discussion. The climate plan also relates to and complements other university planning processes. Bear with us as we fix that, thank you. In December 2021, the board approved the campus plan for the Twin Cities. This plan identifies how campus land use, built and natural assets, and related aspects of campus will change over time. The climate plan we are presenting to you today responds to that campus plan and identifies how the university can eliminate its emissions that contribute to climate change and become more resilient to climate change's effects. Following completion of the campus, or the climate action plan rather, the institution will undertake utility and energy plans that will further detail the technical details needed to support both the campus and the climate plans. For Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester, campus and climate planning are being done as an integrated activity over the next few years. The first campus to complete this integrated planning is the University of Minnesota Duluth, who will present their framework for review at the board's June meeting. In order to put climate planning into context, we've invited Dr. Heidi Roop to join us today. Dr. Roop is an assistant professor in the CFANS College of Food, Ag, and Natural Sciences. She is a subject matter expert on climate change, director of the Climate Adaptation Partnership here in Minnesota, and she will be too modest to tell you this, but she's also a recent book author and publisher. She published a climate action guide that you should ask her about. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Roop with your permission, Chair Hipsch.
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, members, for having me today. This is a real distinct honor, and one of my associate deans told me probably the first and last time in my career as an academic, so hopefully that's not the case, but we'll see. I've got 10 minutes to either keep or forget, so my application for tenure will also come before you at sometime in the next year or two, so bear with me. So the title of my slide here says Climate Change in Minnesota, but as an extension specialist and an assistant professor of climate science and as the director of the university's Climate Adaptation Partnership, I get to sit in a role as being an ambassador for science and the university with communities across the state who are seeking to understand not only how to confront the challenges that they're navigating through day in, day out as they experience the the real world climate crisis that's unfolding in front of us, and also ask critical questions about the university's leadership. So I'm going to talk to you not only about the challenges that we face as a state and what we're already observing and what we expect the future to look like, but critically how Minnesotans and our campus community are looking to all of us, yourselves included, for leadership. There's quite a bit of hope, which is surprising, and I'll show you some statistics. I don't necessarily wake up hopeful every day, but I'm certainly motivated and supported by an institution like this one that is helping me to accelerate and really realize the vision of our land-grant institution and to demonstrate national leadership as we work hand in hand with the state legislature to increase our investments and our ability for extension to show up, not only for our campus community, but for Minnesotans across the state. So do we care about climate change, right? I'm obviously get the great privilege of telling you all the things that are going wrong, all the terrible bad news, but I think I'd like to start with the good news, which is that a majority of folks across our state are concerned about climate change, and 80% of our campus community here in the Twin Cities reported that climate change is extremely or very important to them. Importantly, we see a call and a desire for solutions. 64% of Minnesotans in a recent poll that the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences and our partnership distributed across the state in September of last year notes that Minnesotans want to see the preservation and conservation of our state's grasslands, forests, and wetlands. No surprise there. There's broad support for adoption and transition to a renewable energy economy. And 80% of Minnesotans report seeing institutions of higher education like this one as critical leaders for researching and discovering solutions that will work here for us and also demonstrate international leadership. So I have here your climate change Cliffs Notes. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which includes thousands of my peers and colleagues from across the globe, have over the last several years updated our state of science around climate change around the world. To save you from having to wade through those tens of thousands of peer-reviewed papers and their synthesis, I have what I think are the most important points here, and I'll walk through those in the context of Minnesota here in a moment. First, we know it's us. We know the cause of the challenges and the changes that we're observing. That's human activity. We know that the fingerprints of climate change are here now. We're not just planning for the future, we're planning for today. We know we've committed to change. That is, we've set change in motion, so we have to prepare. We also know the more we emit of greenhouse gases, the worse it will get. That's a choice we still get to make. We know we have to reduce our risk through adaptation, and that's true here for our campus community and the communities that we are interconnected with, and Shane will tell you more about the vision that the Twin Cities campus is painting for how we do that. And importantly, we still choose. We're sitting in a critical decade where we have an opportunity to act and an opportunity to build a bolder, brighter, more equitable future. And climate change should be part of how we make those decisions. We also know the time to do so is now, and that we don't have any more time to waste. So it's us. Rarely do scientists say words like this, so I'm gonna say it because I can, and because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put it in a report that was ratified by hundreds of countries across the globe, which is that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, their oceans, and our land. And we know the cause of this warming, and we also see the rate of warming as unprecedented in at least the last 2,000 years. And I put that there because that's part of my research. I study paleoclimate in addition to the future climate. So my research to date has contributed to that context, that long, deep time context. We know climate change is here. So we've already warmed our average global temperature by 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 1800s. And Minnesota, of course, is above average in almost every regard, including the rate at which we are warming, which is our temperature has increased by 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895. What this figure here shows from the state's Department of Natural Resources, our state climatology office that's actually located on this campus over in Borlaug Hall with us. We have a climate floor now. Watch out, we're taking over. Is that we can see that the rate of warming across seasons is not the same. And we basically need to track and understand what is Minnesota's own climate change look like. And if you look, those red colors show us where our very low temperatures, those cold, iconically Minnesotan days in northern Minnesota are over 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they were 100 years ago. So we are observing warmth, and not only that, rapid warming. We see the state on average getting warmer and wetter. Our warmest and wettest years on record have all occurred after 1997. Our heavy rain events are 13% heavier than they were in the past. And our growing season is lengthened by 2 weeks since 1950. We expect these changes to continue to worsen. This is just an example of warming that we expect to occur by mid-century. Most of us alive today will be around to experience this future, so again, we're not planning for a far, far away future, but one that we all need to be ready for. These maps show the possible outcome in terms of the number of days per year that are warmer than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. We can do this for 95, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I know we also have some health experts here today, and it's no surprise that, of course, that has impacts on the health and well-being of all of us, our student population, of course, our campus community. Extreme heat impacts our human health, the ways we do our work, who gets to work, our economy, and it creates stress on critical infrastructure that we all rely on every day. We see those heavy rainfall events also impacting our overall flood risk, causing disruption to transportation, damage to property, infrastructure, and again, critically, human health, and that includes the health and well-being of our campus community as well. Importantly, as we grapple with the challenges and realities of climate change, we have to hold two truths simultaneously. And these are two truths we're observing already, ones we've already had to navigate through as a state just in the last 24 months. We're transitioning between wet and dry extremes more quickly and more frequently. That is almost impossible to plan for, but that is why you all have power and I just get to say what we're seeing. This is really difficult, right? As we confront climate change in our state and how we prepare, we have to be thinking not only about hot extremes and dry extremes, but wet extremes, and making sure that our community, our infrastructure, that we're planning for these impacts and building resilience across the system, while we also seek to mitigate the problem, which is reduce emissions, which this campus has demonstrated serious leadership in nationally, and Shane will get there. So I think importantly, we like to talk about climate change globally, also locally, but we also know very clearly that the impacts of climate change that happen outside of our state, outside of this community, outside of the domain that you have authority over, right? We have to be thinking that climate change needs no passport. We've seen this bear out in our local economies and in our own campus community over the last several years. We see climate change impacts causing economic harm and societal impacts across national, state, and I'd even insert here campus boundaries for supply chains, markets, natural resources, where our students are in space and time, right? We are interconnected with the world around us. And so we also have to acknowledge that as we think about how we prepare for the changes we've set in motion. We also know very clearly that climate change is costly, and it's even more so with inaction. We can look at a recent report by the White House that states the fiscal risk of climate change is immense. That's also true here. Under current policy pathways, this is global policy pathways, and in the United States, we expect climate change to reduce our US GDP by anywhere between 3 and 10% by the end of the century. We also know critically that the choice is ours, right? That range of 3 to 10%, part of that's reflected in what we choose to do or not. Same as far as how warm the planet gets, how warm the state gets, and the impacts that stem from that warming. This slide illustrates that option. Under very high emissions, the planet could be over 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by the end of the century. Conversely, if we choose to act with robust and abundant and urgent action, we could actually lower the global average temperature and situate ourselves somewhere closer to the global policy targets, which aim to limit warming to about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a number you've probably heard in the news. Importantly, climate risk management requires two things, and you'll see this reflected in the Climate Action Plan. We need to prevent the problem from getting worse by doing everything we can to reduce emissions, while we seek to prepare our community and those around us for the changes we've already set in motion. This is essentially risk management, and effective risk management in a climate changed world requires investments and actions that address both mitigation and adaptation. And I'll lean on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change because I think this quote is really important and something that I hope we all sit with. It states, any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. And I'm going to end with a note of hope because I'm not going to just drop that in the middle here. Which is that when I work with communities and students and other faculty across our community, and we ask Minnesotans, too, what they want to see done and whether they have hope that we will rise to the occasion, that we will embrace this opportunity, the answer is yes. 62% of Gen Zers across the state are hopeful society will do enough to reduce the most severe impacts of climate change. And when asked who they hold responsible, I think it's really enlightening to see that there's hope and a desire for systems-based change, for coordination and collaboration across our local and state units of government, the private sector, federal government, state and local government, and educational institutions like ours. We have an opportunity to lead, and I'm going to pass it to Shane, who's going to show you not only how we have been leading in the domain of climate, but the vision that the community has put forward before you for how we'd like to move forward into this future and demonstrate that national bold leadership while also protecting our community as we move into an uncertain but certainly warmer future.
Thank you. As you just heard from Dr. Roop, there is a real call on the part of Minnesotans that we take action on this issue and that it's imperative for all sectors of society to engage in this work. And fortunately, we have a really strong foundation as an institution to build from. In 2008, the university pledged to address its emissions that contribute to climate change and to advance climate action through its mission. Since that time, we've reduced our own emissions by over 50%, and we've contributed important discoveries to climate solutions and climate science. We provided expertise to communities that are grappling with the climate crisis, and we've graduated countless students who have gone on to work in climate solutions, climate change science, and other related careers. These achievements are something to be proud of, and they also give us a lot of confidence that we can meet the goals that we're going to describe to you today. In order to develop the plan that we're presenting today, we engaged the campus community widely. Through that engagement process, we heard resounding support that this should be a priority for the institution. We met with stakeholders across 3 phases of outreach that included 5 events and a campus survey. We also met groups on their own terms, engaging with over 20 organizations on campus. Lastly, we'd like to recognize that students, faculty, and staff who were members of working groups that developed the content that will be presented today. With their help and the guidance of the Twin Cities Sustainability Committee, we've developed a plan that is rooted in science and data, is ambitious, and will guide us over the next 10 years. Many of those working group and committee members are in the audience today. You can identify them by their Climate Champion buttons that they're wearing. And during the break, I asked that you join me in thanking them for their substantial contributions and service to the institution. It was an immense undertaking and process that they went through. The plan has 2 elements. First, it evaluates our exposure to the impacts of climate change and develops the campus's first climate risk and strength assessment. Second, the climate plan creates a pathway for reducing carbon pollution in 5 categories of emissions. These categories are some of the university's largest areas of tracked emissions, are highly visible, and require systemic change over an extended period of time. The climate plan outlines a vision for each area of emissions. Each vision is supported by a suite of goals, and within the plan document, you'll see strategies and key performance indicators that tie to those goals and give you further depth about what they're going to accomplish. On the following slides, I'm going to present to you the vision and goals for each emissions category, starting with goals related to energy. So the next 2 slides cover how we provide energy to our campus buildings and environment to power lights in this room, projectors, equipment, keep buildings warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Emissions from burning natural gas and other fossil fuels to heat, cool our buildings and to provide that electricity accounts for close to 75% of our total campus emissions. We can reduce these emissions by supplying energy from decarbonized sources and by reducing the amount of energy used. Because energy supply and energy demand are intricately linked, the vision for these 2 areas of emissions are the same. The climate plan aims to cut these energy emissions by 60% over the next decade. To reduce emissions from electricity, we can improve our energy independence and create tangible, visible examples of climate leadership by increasing on-campus solar production on parking lots and building roofs. Off campus, we can contribute to greening the grid through purchasing renewable energy in locations where it's not likely to happen without our commitment. And to reduce emissions from heating and cooling, we are proposing a framework that improves supply efficiency and identifies and implements a decarbonized heating fuel. In energy demand, we have to focus on new construction and the existing stock of buildings. We cannot add to the challenge at hand by constructing new buildings or completing major renovations that increase emissions. In that case, we're just digging the hole deeper and we have more work to do in other areas. To that end, the climate plan calls for accelerating the implementation of the state of Minnesota's sustainable building standards and implementing a zero emissions requirement or net zero emissions requirement on these new projects. For existing buildings, we can retrofit those facilities with more efficient technologies, optimize the operation of the building through advanced controls. Finally, reducing the amount of building space we have reduces energy consumption. For every square foot of space we don't have, that's a piece of building that we don't actually have to provide energy to, and that energy doesn't create emissions, that unused energy. There's a researcher long ago referred to these as negawatts, negative units of energy. So there's a little teaser there. With the increase in hybrid work, efficiencies in space and real estate can be actualized. And the goal to optimize space aligns with both the Twin Cities campus plan as well as the Work with Flexibility program. Many of these strategies in both energy supply and demand also save money, reduce price volatility, and lessen inflationary pressure on our budget, which is the utilities budget is one of the largest categories of expense for the institution after salaries and benefits. The next 3 sets of goals concern how we connect people. The emissions related to connecting our community to campus, around campus, and to locations across the world comprise nearly 25% of our emissions. This includes emissions from student, faculty, staff, and commuting to campus. On the whole, the student population drives far less than faculty and staff. So although our student population is larger, emissions from student commuting is about equal to or less than those of faculty and staff. We've made strides on commuting emissions through providing a universal transit pass to all students, programs to support biking and walking, and facilitating hybrid work. Further incentives will be critical to achieve our climate emissions reductions goals, but continued engagement with governmental, private sector, and transportation partners is essential as well. The ability to switch to lower emissions forms of transportation often depends on things like public safety, the availability and location of affordable housing, transit routes, and improving electric vehicle charging infrastructure. The university's fleet on the Twin Cities campus comprises over 400 vehicles. Many of these vehicles have electric vehicle replacements available on the market today that would be viable from a total cost of ownership perspective and the use case. When the electric grid is decarbonized and supported by our clean energy supply targets, emissions from the use of electric vehicles will be nearly zero. Efficiencies in the fleet and reduced emissions can also be realized through route optimization and by using smaller vehicles. And lastly, I want to point out that we have many third-party providers and vendors that come to campus to provide services, including things like the Campus Connector that goes around and moves people from West Bank, East Bank, and St. Paul. Moving forward, we will work with these providers to ensure our climate goals are advanced through their service delivery as well. Finally, traveling to other parts of the world, whether for study abroad or for research or for athletic competition, is integral to our mission. The plan recognizes that travel is important and it will continue, and in some cases, it might even grow. It is also a category of emissions for which we have limited levers to affect change. In response, the plan focuses on reducing the emissions impact through procurement. Examples of this include using airlines that are already engaged in their own efforts to reduce emissions and making sure that we're contracting with them, and then also selecting flights that have lower emissions profiles, and I'm sure many of us have personally experienced this when we go to Google Flights and we see the little thing that says this flight has 12% lower emissions than a comparable flight. We can do those sorts of things in our own travel purchasing here at the institution. Additionally, this category of emissions is one in which carbon offsets may be appropriate, at least in the near term, and I want to take a minute to explain what a carbon offset is. It's a tool in emissions mitigation that allows for continued emissions in one area while undertaking emissions reduction in another. The existing carbon offset market, though, is fraught with problems, but carbon removal from the atmosphere is also critical to limit warming, as Dr. Roop had highlighted. The university can play an important leadership role, therefore, in addressing the challenges with the carbon offsets market by applying its expertise to advance the science, to inform policy, and then to demonstrate through practice how we can catalyze carbon offsets that are both rigorous, verifiable, and connected to our mission. In combination, these 5 areas of goals and vision and the strategies that support them will contribute to a 60% reduction in emissions over the next decade. That is building upon our already 50% reduction from the last decade. So this progress and this trajectory is really substantial in terms of our leadership as an institution around carbon mitigation and emissions reduction. The reduction is also aligned with targets published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the plan establishes a vision for directly eliminating emissions over the longer term from purchased electricity by 2033 and from our on-campus energy plants by 2045, while becoming carbon neutral and commuting and air travel by mid-century. As you heard earlier from Dr. Root, the world is already committed to some degree of warming, and climate change was just having and will continue to have significant impacts. As a place-based institution, we are unlikely to move the university to cope with these effects. I work routinely with colleagues in the private sector who have factories and different facilities around the world, and they have the option of moving. As a place-based institution, we do not. So we have to adapt and become more resilient to whatever climate change is going to bring us here in the Twin Cities. To advance this preparation, the plan documents our first assessment of vulnerability and strengths relative to climate change on the Twin Cities campus. This assessment chronicles anticipated climate hazards for our area and maps those relative to campus's natural systems, our infrastructure, and our people to identify our risks. Through understanding these risks and applying our adaptive strengths, we can build resilience to the impacts of climate change. In the coming months, we're going to build on this initial assessment to identify specific goals and strategies for how to foster resilience to the impacts of climate change on campus. Through the planning effort, common themes emerged across the emissions and adaptation work groups. The plan combines these into a set of cross-cutting initiatives that have the potential to further multiple objectives. I just want to call your attention to the first 2. Enacting initiatives outlined in this plan will require resources. There's no doubt about that. And in some cases, this can be done by aligning our existing expenditures to support climate objectives. In other instances, additional upfront resources may be required, but those costs often are recovered over time. In order to operationalize these changes, new financial approaches and tools will likely be needed. Examples of what we can do in regard to this include things like internal carbon pricing, which helps surface climate risk associated with certain decisions, or pursuing efforts to access incentives such as clean energy tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act. Regarding the second bullet, as a higher ed institution, our greatest lever for building a fully sustainable future is the research we produce and in the learning we catalyze. But that goal and the initiatives outlined in this plan will be unattainable unless we connect curricular and research activities with campus climate action. University experts have invaluable insights to contribute to campus climate solutions, and by working on these, the researchers also benefit too. The challenges offered by campus climate action are often a microcosm of the issues we find in broader society, and so it's a place to experiment and try things and to innovate. And working on these challenges then allows those research to advance scholarship while enhancing their impact as they engage with external communities. Similarly, we know the learning environment can have a tremendous impact on student outcomes. Simply put, if we want our graduates to build a fully sustainable future, we should show them an example of what it looks like on campus. It'll be much easier for them to go out and actualize and build that fully sustainable future if they have a reference point from their campus experience while they're here as a student. By emulating a fully sustainable future and connecting curriculum that it relates to the climate plan, we can prepare our students to build that fully sustainable future post-graduation. In closing, this is a critical inflection point for the university and society. The next 10 years matter a great deal in regard to how much warming we will experience and its impacts on people, communities, and cherished places, including this institution. In the face of this, now more than ever, our students, the communities we serve, and our partners are looking to the university to provide leadership in response to the climate crisis. This moment requires bold and immediate action across all facets of our organization. This includes leadership through our example and implementation of solutions laid out in this plan. We have the power and the resources to do this. With the engagement of the board and university leaders and a significant level of commitment and transformation, including putting climate action at the forefront of what we do, we can achieve the vision. We thank you for your time, and we look forward to discussion and your questions.
Well, thank you for that great presentation and the very great comprehensive report. I know I learned a lot from it. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I mean, our packet was pretty long this month, but I just want to congratulate you on putting this together. And I know, our previous presentation, I think Myron said we had 900 buildings and 50% of them are over 50 years old or something like that. And so we need to, adjust everything in them, windows and heating and air conditioning, everything. But it's going to be a lot of money. And so we have to balance that with everything else we're trying to do, but this is really important. I don't know. So I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any. Thank you for the report. Regent Verhalen, you're over there now. Okay.
I'm over here now.
Okay. Looking for you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you so much for the presentation. This stuff is really exciting personally and professionally for me, so it's really great to hear how much the university is doing. One question I have, and I'm not sure if it's best for either of you or USVP friends, but as we think about all of these things, especially as the university and its campuses will hopefully become more self-sustainable in energy resources, thinking through what that does to our budget. Because right now, relying on others, it's O&M, it's monthly bills, it's that type of categorization. But a lot of these efforts to become self-sustainable are capital intensive with a lower O&M, but that doesn't mean that it's more expensive to do it ourselves. It's instead thinking about it differently. And under the structures that we've had for so many decades, over a century, thinking about use of commodities and personal commoditization of some of these things, how can we as a board position ourselves to better be able to implement some of these things instead of, having a monthly, thinking of it in a residential context, having a monthly $100 electric bill, but then you make the investment to either build a property, self-owned solar garden, or participate in a community solar garden. Sometimes that capital cost can be a deterrent. because you're not thinking about it as payments over a very long period of time. And so I know there's a lot wrapped into that comment, but I know there's a lot that we need to start thinking about differently in how we approach this.
Thank you. Vice President.
Chair Hips, thank you, Regent Verhalen, really great comments. You know, I think it does underscore the great presentation and the issues that Professor Roop and Mr. Stennis mentioned. I think as we talk about, you know, we've been talking about becoming more efficient just in office space, for example. 25%, 26% of our space is office space. And we now know that based upon our recent experience with COVID and other ways of working flexible and remotely, that we can do this much more effectively and efficiently. And that's when you get to the situation where a vacant office over here doesn't really help us much because that building is still there, nothing really changes. You need to make sure you collect those office spaces in a wing or in a building, and then you can do something different with that building, or in some cases take down the building, because there are some of these buildings we need to decide what our footprint is. But your point's well taken, because our footprint drives our budget so much just because of what we have. And so we've got to be strategic about positioning our footprint going forward. I do think, though, well, I'll just also offer people to ride their bike in like I try to do it whenever I can, and join me in that endeavor. But it is in some cases the small things that matter. But if we don't do that across the system, we'll never get it done. But our system is big enough that a lot of small things actually add up. But I appreciate your comments.
I think it's a very long bike ride from Perham.
Yeah, I could use it though, probably.
Your point is well taken. Thank you, and great presentation.
Thank you.
Good job. Student Representative Davis.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. I wanted to extend the support from students from many of the students around the climate action plan. We sincerely appreciate the amount of consultation that has been done on the part of the Office of Sustainability and as well as everyone who worked on this. You've really done a great job of treating the university community like the critical stakeholders that they are in this process, and we appreciate the efforts that have been made around that. I'm sure you are aware, but for those of you in the room who don't know, the Twin Cities campus has over 30 student groups that focus on sustainability and the environment. So this is an issue that many of us are extremely passionate about, and those who worked on the plan, again, did a great job of including students in that process. I saw signs around campus for those listening sessions and those working groups as well. And I know we had some folks come and consistently advertise that at our forums, and gave us materials to distribute on social media for any students who wanted to participate. So that was a really great initiative, and I wanted to, take a moment to say students are supportive of this and highlight the amazing possibilities that can happen in this work when students are brought in on the issues that really matter to us. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Student Representative Davis, and thank you for your comments. It's really important that the students are involved in this and that this is really important to them. And so appreciate your comments and verbalizing them. So Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair. My comments are along the lines of Regent Verhalen's, although she's much more knowledgeable than I am. What struck me was looking at some of your data where people are concerned and they're interested in solving, yet that percentage drops when it comes down to actually doing anything. The 64% who think we should prepare, that seemed low to me, although I imagine in places it's high. How do we look at that within the budget in a sense of, it's embedded in our budget numbers, I imagine. Do we pull it out so that we can direct investments in there? And kind of another part of that goes back to Representative Davis' comments, and that 64%, I mean, who's willing to do something? Is there a generational difference in, what was it, 1970s, the when we started thinking about this and today, and those younger than me that are growing up within this crisis. So it's kind of a combination question or just a comment.
Dr. do you want to speak to the data?
Yeah, I can speak to those data. Yeah, so the 64% number is related specifically to those across Minnesota. So this is a Minnesota-wide poll that, and that's across geographies, age groups, political affiliation. So we had a diversified sample and a robust sample size, over 1,000 respondents, which is greater than some of the national scale surveying that happens for climate change opinions. In fact, the Yale number is 1,000. They have 1,000 respondents. So we exceeded that by 3, but still just for one state. And so that 64% number is specifically as it relates to the natural resource-based solutions, natural climate solutions. There was actually less interest in some of the broader, less interest, it still was over 60% for the renewable energy. But when we do look at the younger generation, not only did all of the numbers go up for the desire for action, from mitigation actions and investments to adaptation actions and investments, but there also was increased concern, a much higher reported level of climate anxiety, but also paired with a significantly higher response in terms of hope that society would do enough to confront the challenge. And I think that for me was, it's a reminder for me as I do the work, like there's a need for the solutions. There's a breadth of buy-in for needing a portfolio of response that's across political divides, that's across geographic divides. People are broadly interested in seeing something get done. Exactly what, and of course, who pays? Those are the big questions. But I am really heartened that the conversation has moved beyond it not being a problem, but one where we're debating about how we solve it and how we, I think, integrate climate, say, into every budget and into every career and in every decision. And that's increasingly happening at the state legislature. Conversations around bond ratings, things like that. Climate is increasingly integrated and part of those really critical facets that make the heartbeat of this institution. So thank you for this opportunity and those. I'd be happy to share the full survey results with you all if that would be of interest.
Thank you. Representative. Senior Vice President Pfaff.
Chair, I've always wanted an election certificate. But I do want to follow up with Professor Roop's comments, because one of the things that we need to sort of take a step back, and not only do we need to do these things, but we need to do them strategically. And that's why in the plan, we have strategic planning money dedicated to doing this in a thoughtful way, because as these two folks have taught us, it's that collaboration, and as Student Representative Davis mentioned, it's collaborating with everybody and making sure, and that's where our planning money can be used strategically to make sure that we leverage on some of the investments we make. So we got to do it, but we have to do it smartly too. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With your new commitment to biking, we can update our target year. Maybe move that back to 2032 or something like that. Thank you very much for the presentation and all the work and attention on this. And I think this conversation, just the way it fits in today, we talked about the capital plan, right? And that's so related. We're having this conversation, and in about an hour, we'll be hearing from Stuart Mason on the endowment and ESG, how that plays a role in there. So I think that shows how sustainability permeates, across all different functions and is everyone's responsibility. And over the past year, I've had the opportunity to attend some Institute on Environment events and meet the German delegation that came through, and learned a lot from those folks. So I definitely appreciate this. You touched a bit on it about risk, right? And how we think about risk and adapt, especially with climate scenarios. And maybe I still have my audit and compliance lens on right now, but I was hoping you could talk either of you could talk a bit more about that from an institutional perspective, thinking about risk and climate.
Thank you.
I can start. So thank you for the question, Regent Kenyanya. And I think your opening remarks, your sort of comment leading into it, really resonates with me, is that there's an opportunity to integrate sustainability and climate into many facets of what we do, and I look at your docket today, and I see touch points across the span. Contracts for personnel, the ESG policy that you mentioned around the endowment and the foundation management. So I think absolutely, I just want to emphasize and reiterate what you said. I think that that's very true, and it's been our experience as well. Around risk, I think this is an area that we are starting to get more into as a campus and intend to work going forward with the Office of Risk Management to really start to better understand, how do we incorporate climate risk into our thinking and where might it materialize and where might it show up. So as we presented, we really, for the campus adaptation and resilience planning, we're engaged in that initial survey and assessment to understand what is our baseline and where are we building from and where are some categories or areas that we maybe have more exposure to that we would want to address and then really think about strategically tackling so we can, as others have pointed out, strategically use our resources knowing that they are not infinite in number. I think the other thing I just would add to this response is throughout the theme of many of the comments and questions that have been surfaced already, I sort of hear this common thread around how do we pay for it? And it's one of those things that we are keenly attuned to. And so as part of the planning process, while it is a long-term plan, it was not meant to quantify costs. We did ask groups to consider cost as part of their selection of strategies and to evaluate those as one criteria in their evaluation of potential goals and strategies. And we also benefited from the support of a consultant on some of the energy modeling that we did. And through that process, one of the things that we learned, and take this with an appropriate large grain of salt, is that our business as usual case is not cost-free. That we are going to continue to spend money on facilities and buying energy and replacing plants and equipment, and that has a number that's not insignificant over a 30-year horizon. The cost of implementing these climate solutions is comparable to that number of business as usual. It changes the balance, though. It moves more into the capital space and less out of the operating space, and that does have implications, as Regent Verheugen had highlighted. And so I think how we manage those is a key question for the institution to tackle. The other quick thing I'll say about cost is we've just got through a very detailed assessment on the fleet using an outside advisor that actually looked at our fleet's real-time data and tracking it in real time over the course of 180 days. And we found out of 200 vehicles that we assessed, 140 of them are ready for EV replacement today. They have the use case, and they're cheaper on a total cost of ownership basis or the same cost as the existing internal combustion engine vehicle. So we know that for certain categories of things, we can make those shifts now. It's really supply chain availability that prevents us from doing it, and some strategic planning around how do we build this out in a thoughtful way. I don't know if Dr. Roop has anything else to add about risk in a broader context across the state.
Yeah, I will just mention one of the ways that our organization at the Climate Adaptation Partnership, we've been contributing to this conversation and one around the state is that the state legislature did invest in the University of Minnesota in our climate modeling expertise and the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute to actually generate future climate information for the state. We'll have that available by the end of the year, and that's at a really high resolution. So we're talking on a sort of 3-kilometer grid cell. So if you draw a box between the fairgrounds and the state capitol, we're generating point-by-point information about future climate, precipitation risk, flood risk, a whole bunch of different variables, heat stress. And we've been partnering with units on campus like the Center for Sustainable Building Research that are really at the cutting edge of this to think about how do we start to build common language so that these data and this investment can be integrated not only in state agency frameworks for decision making, but also those here at the institution and guide not only student learning, but our own decision making and our own risk analysis to say as we get more refined and sophisticated information, how does that come into play as we think about these the energy modeling or even some of the financial modeling that should come down the road. So we're trying to be part of the solution in that climate science space and generating really place-specific risk information about our campus and the campuses across the state too, across the system.
Real briefly.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. That was very detailed and helpful. And you mentioned how there's always a cost, and we're transferring from operations to capital some of it. And that I don't know. As I think about that in the past 120 seconds that I've had to, I feel like there are scenarios where that may open up new funding opportunities. When you're talking capital, you have bonding, you know, you have bonding available to you, have partnerships and whatnot, where you're not going to have private partners and donors, you know, funding operations, but they could partner up with us on that conversion. And then from then on, you know, OEM is freed up, you know, to support students and whatnot. So thank you.
Thank you. Regent Gully.
I, first of all, just wanted to say thank you so much, along with my fellow regents, for this incredible presentation and more for the work that you're doing on campus. This is one of the things that I think about so this is actually my first meeting as a regent, which is really exciting. When I was at the legislature talking about why I wanted to join this board, a lot of it was because of the work that is being done on campus that is bringing students into real life, you know, not just like real life work, but real life opportunities to take on challenges, you know, in a really concrete way while they're also students. And I can just see that that so clearly here, the way that you've engaged all the student groups and the way that you've brought students into this research is just incredible, and it will have a real impact. So thank you. I'm wondering, one of the things that that I know I can speak for myself, but also have heard from the other two new regents, that we heard a lot when we were talking to community members and legislators about coming onto this board, was that we need to do a better job of communicating about these things. So I was wondering, how are we, and you know, what efforts have been made and what efforts could be made to communicate about this to the broader public beyond the University of Minnesota?
It's a great question. So Chair Hipsch, Regent Gully. So in terms of the communication, that is keenly on our radar. It's also something that's come out recently in we had a system-wide sustainability council retreat, which involved the provost and chancellors, and this was top of mind for them too, is how do we just communicate more broadly about the work that we are already doing and highlighting that more distinctly. So I think we'll have more to come in that space, that we're working on initiatives with university relations around how we would go about doing that in a more effective way to broaden our reach. The other kind of piece of this, which I will defer to Dr. Roop on, is that's the broad sustainability efforts across the campus. I think there's a lot of opportunity too within the context of individual programs and the services that we're providing. And so Dr. Roop and the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership does a lot of work reaching out to communities and connecting with stakeholders across the state that I think is really instructive.
Yeah, thank you. Again, there are, of course, so many units on campus that are doing this work, so I'm not going to be able to give them all credit. We should put them all together in a packet. There are, organizations like the Institute on the Environment, and we've partnered to stand up the first Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is funded by the Department of Interior. That's a collaboration across the greater Midwest region, really focused on research for application. So partnering with tribes and natural resource managers and other folks across the whole Midwest region. That's a new center amongst other national centers, just as an example of sort of research to practice. And also I can speak to my role being within Extension, and the Extension has centered climate as one of its priorities. It's shown up across many of our program areas, but there's now a targeted and dedicated investment in expanding our program across the state. I was hired to stand up a climate extension program, and as we are all waiting for the state legislature to make decisions, are hopeful that we will be securing sufficient resources to expand that program with a statewide footprint, such that the university will have dedicated climate resilience extension educator capacity across our whole state, so that we can provide the assistance not only in understanding the risks and understanding the research needs, but also helping communities respond and principally secure many of the implementation dollars that are available both through state programs, but also federal programs like the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA. So there are lots of opportunities, and we've been trying to situate ourselves and leverage the research and the knowledge we have as an institution, but critically fill a capacity gap that we so clearly hear from local units of government and others across the state. So that is one way that within CFANS and critically Extension, we're trying to leverage our expertise and our existing infrastructure to really respond and connect with with and in and for, and in partnership with Minnesotans, because this is, of course, as we said, an all hands on deck situation. So we are hoping to then also bring the university's leadership into those domains so that they can learn from some of our mistakes or some of our strengths and our successes. So that's one way our program is really working to meet that need across the state.
Okay. Thank you. We have Regent Turner, and then Regent Johnson's going to bring us home, so,
Thank you, Chair.
yeah.
My question is, oftentimes, and maybe they are part of the resource, and I thank the students for all their input and work, but has the frontline workers, in regards to this, been a part of this solution also? Because they're the ones that are seen, I assume when you talked about the fleets being assessed, you might have used, had their help, but they're the ones who are going to see whether behavior is really being changed. And I think of mainly recycling and things like that. And so, and they're often, the frontline worker, or in whatever sense, is not often asked their opinion of, but they're the ones who can do that kind of in-depth assessment that might elude the academia.
Yeah, just real briefly, Regent Turner. So we have frontline workers that are part of our Twin Cities Sustainability Committee, as well as work groups that assembled recommendations for the climate plan. And then in terms of the climate resilience assessment that was done as part of the planning process, we specifically focused on as one element of workers or people that we wanted to make sure that we were being attentive to is those who are essential employees and who work outside in the elements and are more exposed to the impacts of climate change. And so going forward, they will be a critical group of university stakeholders to engage in this work, for sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Regent Johnson.
Regent Hipsch, thank you. I'll add my voice of thanks for this. I just was thinking, as Regent Kenyanya mentioned, I had the opportunity last fall to be here for that meeting where we had faculty, staff, alumni, legislators, a whole coalition of people meeting to learn about some of the things that were going on here, what work we were doing, some as alluded to with Germany and other things we've been learning. It was really great. And that is an opportunity also to get the word out there to a broader community about what we're doing. So again, thank you for this report. It's fantastic. And I think if we're getting ready to finish this, I was just thinking, I hope that all the other people who've been working on the climate work here, we could ask them to stand so we can give them all a round of applause. Thank you.
Do that. That's a good idea. So if you've been involved in this, please stand up. Well, thank you for the presentation, and we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Better.
Yeah, oh, okay. So I think it was just. Two of us.
Did the gavel break?
First time on the gavel and I broke it.
Let's give him a round of applause. Yes.
Wow.
Gavel's fine, but the coaster's in two pieces, so. Okay, we're okay though. We're gonna be okay.
You didn't let the capital budget.
Yeah.
I don't feel safe here.
Needed to.
So that's the first time that happened. But anyway, here we go. Okay, so I call the Finance and Operations meeting back to order, and our next item is the discussion of the annual workforce and human resources strategy report. Vice President Ken Horstman, Director Angel Udine, Senior Director Brandon Sullivan, and Senior Director Mary Roman Cool are here to lead the discussion. Vice President Horstman, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Hipp.
Recess at call the chair.
We're going to recess the meeting. The meeting is now in recess.
Hey, Regents, hear us speak.
Okay, we're going to resume the meeting. Okay. Vice President Ken Horstman, do you want to take over? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hips, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. We hope to finish with time for conversation. This year marks a change to the annual report for human resources. In your materials, you will find the annual report on compensation for senior leaders, P&A, and civil service staff, and faculty that has been our scope and charge in past years for this report. To this, we have added a summary report for the Office of Human Resources and each area of expertise that supports the mission of the university, its campuses, and colleges. The presentation today will cover specific areas of work within this report and not only focus on a report out on compensation. This change has been the outcome of discussion over the past year with chairs of this committee and as a result of past committee conversations when we were presenting. We view this as an evolving report year over year, and we are happy to discuss other topics in this report today if follow-up is necessary to determine what can be added or changed for the future. OHR recommendations out of this year's annual total compensation report can be found starting on page 186 of the docket. The intent of our discussion is to update the committee on the university human resources work to meet our Impact 25 commitments. Key elements of meeting these commitments are our equity, diversity, and inclusion approach, as well as our talent strategy and total rewards initiatives. Additionally, we will provide an update to the Board of Regents on our workforce composition, as well as opportunities and challenges in our horizon. Of the commitments stated in Impact 25, community and belonging and fiscal stewardship speak to the work of human resources the loudest. When we look at the goal of recruitment and retention of a diverse workforce, that goal cannot be realized without the creation and constant maintenance and improvement of a welcoming and inclusive workplace and climate. Commitments 5's goal of enhancing on-campus opportunities for all students is much more than the number of employment opportunities and the wages paid, although those are very important. When possible, the university has constructed employment opportunities that align with the student's education and in many cases could be considered an internship. That is a value both for the student and the university. There are many examples of such positions already at the university, and the potential to utilize this in the future is an opportunity. So how does the work of human resources connect directly with the goals of Impact 2025? Much of the daily work in our office, in total rewards, talent strategy, employee and labor relations, HR operations, communications, and ED&I provide examples of how we support these commitments. Leaders at the university, including leaders in human resources, have an opportunity to connect the individual work of employees to Impact 2025 so that they can easily see the connection of their work to the mission of the university. The first 2 points on this slide are directly from Impact 2025. Service excellence is a key factor and contributor to a high-performing, trusting, and safe work climate for the university. As mentioned in our report this year, OHR has over 60,000 contact points a year at least with our faculty, staff, and student workers, our university leadership and management, supervisors, partner offices, union agents, representatives, and our labor represented employees. How we respond respectfully, supportively, clearly, and honestly, and the understanding and resolutions realized have a significant impact on how our community feels about their work life at the university. How we prepare leadership and supervision to be confident in their accountabilities is equally important. The final point regarding balanced stewardship is an intentional term we use in HR. The university has limited resources, as does any institution, and so we must constantly assess what value comes from when we expend resources toward a certain purpose. Not every need can be the first priority, so it is incumbent on our office to make the correct use of our resources. And as you can see in our report, this comes with continuous effort to connect our work with shared governance, our labor represented faculty and staff, graduate assistants, as well as student workers, P&A, and civil service staff. So with that, I am going to turn it to Director Udine to provide an overview of our OHR strategy in regard to our model for ED&I. Thank you, Angel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hips and Regents. Over the past 10 months, I've had the pleasure of learning about the great work that's taking place at the University of Minnesota and how committed my colleagues are to furthering equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI work. As noted on pages, next slide please, as noticed on pages 170 and 171 of your docket, I spent my first 3 months here gathering insights by asking the following questions of stakeholders in the colleges, campuses, and units. I asked, what does EDI mean to you, and how has it shown up in your work? What are some of the successes? What have you seen as some of the challenges and barriers? Who are some of the champions in the work in the colleges, campuses, and units? And finally, what would you like to see from the EDI team in OHR? From these questions, the EDI strategy and associated pillars were created. This is not a prescriptive strategy, but instead one that aligns with the feedback gathered from key stakeholders. Words are important, especially in the EDI work. We all need to be grounded in definitions of equity, diversity, and inclusion, independent of the acronym. Additionally, a diverse workforce comes with a variety of skill sets, lived experiences, and varied expertise. Equity is when we acknowledge the transferable skill sets and can assure that tools and resources are available to meet mutually agreed upon outcomes. Inclusion is more than just assuring the right voices are part of the discussion and that they have a seat at the table, but rather that proxy voices of all community and stakeholders are present and factored into critical decisions. If equity and inclusion are present, diversity will follow. However, it is important to understand that diversity is more than just race and ethnicity and legal sex. It is the intersectionality of identities which make up diversity. Next slide, please. As we move forward, EDI needs to be embedded in all our work. It is not a project or an initiative of the EDI team, and these 4 pillars will illustrate this. There's intentionality in the order of the pillars. Many might lead with recruitment. We believe we must first look at the people who have already made a commitment to the university, hence beginning with development and retention. We must ensure that our employees are measured against equitable and consistent standards and given opportunity for advancement. We must be proactive and planful about retaining legacy knowledge through comprehensive succession planning. We must also leverage qualitative and quantitative data to tell the story of the life cycle of our workforce, as noted on page 171. That speaks to the collective work between our Office of Human Resources and the Carlson School's analytic lab team. We will also be conducting a cross-mechanism analysis looking at through lines and trends between the Employee Engagement Survey, the Office of Equity and Diversity Campus Climate Survey, and other tools where unintentional barriers might exist. A diverse workforce requires culturally competent leadership. We are working with colleges and units to assess and determine the baseline of cultural competency of those who impact employee experience. People don't leave organizations, they leave leaders. Through team and leader coaching, we hope to create a culture of value, belonging, and appreciation of individuality. Systemic barriers exist in organizations. It's endemic to most policies and practices. If things have been done the same way for decades and no one brings up issues, they continue as is. It is our plan to proactively interrogate these tenets to make sure that we are not complicit in marginalizing anyone from flourishing in the university. Equity analysis and calibration are essential. And finally, when the foundation is solid and we can bring new insights and experiences into the organization, the greatest recruitment tool is fulfilled employees. If we have done our work, those who have already made commitment will tell others. Our leaders will begin to look to fill faculty and staffing gaps based on complement and not fit. We will work in partnership with our talent acquisition team to seek our top talent in diverse pipelines developed through relationships that are fostered with sources and community in a proactive manner versus a reactive approach when there is an immediate need. For more information on what is to come for the remainder of the fiscal year and fiscal year 2024, please refer to page 171 in your docket. In support of Impact 2025's strategic commitments 4 and 5, centered on community and belonging and fiscal stewardship, the EDI strategy and pillars will serve as a systemic plan for recruiting and retaining diverse talent. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Brandon Sullivan, who will present our talent strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. Chair Hipsch, regents, student representatives. The challenges facing the university's workforce are growing, and the institutions and organizations we compete with for talented faculty, staff, and students are not standing still. To address this, we are focused on strategically strengthening the university's capacity for recruiting, hiring, engaging, developing, and retaining faculty and staff. Next slide, please. There are 4 broad themes to the work you see on this slide. First, we are level setting and improving recruiting and hiring system-wide. Historically, there has been a lot of fragmentation, with this work being done inconsistently across colleges, campuses, and units, and often with a lack of needed resources and expertise. We are in the process of defining and implementing consistent, effective recruiting, hiring, and selection practices. Second, we have implemented a number of programs and resources to ensure that all faculty and staff who supervise have the opportunity to build foundational supervisory skills, beginning when they take on their first supervisory responsibilities and throughout their careers. We also have a focus on the readiness and success of our academic department leaders, our chairs and heads. I'll say a bit more about that in a few minutes. Third, we are supporting colleges, campuses, and units in continuously improving the work environment for faculty and staff through taking action on employee engagement. Engagement reflects the commitment and dedication to the work and to the organization and is closely tied to retention, well-being, and an organization's performance. So we are helping leaders use engagement survey data and evidence-based practices to take action aimed at making improvements and also to celebrate and sustain what is already working. And fourth, we are designing and implementing more consistent talent management practices to expand opportunities for employees to grow and develop. For individuals who supervise, this means having the skills to set meaningful goals, provide ongoing feedback and development coaching, and conduct effective performance evaluations. For colleges and units, this means having a holistic understanding of the skills and aspirations of faculty and staff, and having strategies for developing people and aligning work with strategic priorities. One thread running throughout all of this work is that a healthy and adaptable organization has a mix of hiring externally and encouraging internal movement. And to remain competitive, the university needs to do both well. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to highlight a few of the specific talent strategy efforts currently underway. Because hiring practices have been so fragmented across the system, we are now in the process of creating standard best practices and working toward what is called full life cycle recruiting, which includes intake meetings, sourcing candidates, screening, interviewing and selection, as well as setting new employees up for a good experience on day one. These practices are being designed and implemented through broad engagement with the community of people who do talent acquisition-related work in the colleges, campuses, and units. We are also building new tools and training for hiring managers and search committees, and we are providing enhanced support for senior management hires. There are 2 university-wide trends related to engagement that I want to highlight. First, during the pandemic, faculty and staff reported a decline in action being taken on their feedback through the engagement survey. This reversed nearly a decade-long trend of increasing action being taken. And taking action on employee input to improve the work environment is critical for any organization and is the whole point of an engagement survey. The second trend is that for the past 6 years, faculty engagement has been declining. This is concerning as changes in engagement are often followed by changes in turnover and organizational performance. We work closely with departments and colleges to help them understand their survey results and take action at the local level. However, the challenges to our workforce have grown significantly, so we are now also focused on segments of the workforce. One example of this work is work we are doing with faculty governance, specifically the Faculty Consultative Committee, as well as the Provost's Office and academic leaders, to look at departments where faculty are experiencing an especially effective and supportive work environment. We are identifying practices, resources, and approaches that could benefit departments that are struggling and at risk of losing talented faculty. Another example is our partnership with the Office of Information Technology, where we are working with IT leadership to support the IT workforce system-wide. For example, we are using external benchmarks on engagement in the IT world beyond the university, such as in the corporate high technology sector, where we recruit and sometimes lose our IT talent. We're also looking at how turnover among our IT employees is related to engagement, and we are analyzing hundreds of comments from IT employees to our engagement survey to identify key themes for action. All of this is informing a strategy to support the engagement of IT employees system-wide, many of whom work directly with faculty and students. Engagement in large, complex organizations is most effective when addressing segments of the workforce, in addition to a focus on local action. In a decentralized organization such as the university, this is challenging, but efforts like these will be increasingly important going forward. Academic department leadership roles are among the most pivotal roles in the university in terms of impact on the quality of our undergraduate, graduate, and professional programs, the competitiveness of our research enterprise in attracting and retaining field-shaping faculty, and ensuring excellence in patient care and clinical operations. In my experience with many leaders across many industries and types of organizations, the transition from faculty member to department chair is one of the most jarring leadership transitions I've seen. When I work with department chairs, I always ask whether they felt prepared for the challenges of their role, and I have yet to hear a confident yes. These are challenging but very pivotal roles. To address this at the university level, we worked closely with the Provost's Office to build the Academic Department Leadership Program, which just wrapped up its second year. This program helps current department chairs and heads develop their skills in leading and managing their department. At the college level, we work with deans and their leadership teams to help them prepare faculty for leadership roles such as department chair, associate dean, or center director roles. This is called our College Leads program, and we have delivered many of these to our colleges and campuses. Most recently, we just wrapped up a program with the College of Education and Human Development. More broadly, there have been many efforts to encourage leaders and supervisors to do more to give feedback on performance and development. Our data show that faculty and staff are reporting receiving more feedback. At the same time, there is a gap in supervisory skills and capacity for development coaching, which is critical for helping faculty and staff learn new skills, adjust to new ways of working, and prepare for larger, more complex roles. We are currently creating additional training and tools to help faculty and staff in supervisory roles to improve their development coaching skills, which have a direct impact on engagement, retention, and performance. These are some examples of efforts currently underway to support the current and emerging needs of the university. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Mary Roman Kuhl, to discuss total rewards.
Next slide, please. Chair Hipsch, Regents. This past year, the university partnered closely with Duluth administration and Duluth faculty to complete market refinements for faculty salaries. Decisions and agreements were required and reached on 3 key factors. The first factor was to determine the appropriate labor market for Duluth faculty. And you've heard us say before that the labor market is easily defined as a set of institutions from which we hire talent and to which we lose talent. So Carnegie classifications are a recognized framework used to describe higher education institutions of all sizes. So the work group agreed that the appropriate labor market for comparison for our Duluth faculty included institutions in both the M1 master's colleges and universities, larger program Carnegie classification, as well as the R2 doctoral universities, high research activity category. So once the labor market was identified, the second key decision was which salary surveys to use for analysis. Several surveys were assessed against best practice survey criteria, but only one met the work group's selection criteria for adequate sample size, survey frequency, and rigorous data collection methodology. This was the College and Universities Professional Association for Human Resources, or CUPA-HR, Faculty and Higher Education Salary Survey. The third step in the process was to assign each Duluth faculty member to a CIP code. CIP coding is a taxonomy developed by the U.S. Board of Education to accurately track and report fields of study. Conveniently, most faculty salary surveys also report survey data by CIP code. So once these 3 steps were completed, market data was pulled for each area of study, and an analysis was performed to show each faculty member's salary relative to the market median. This analysis showed that the Duluth faculty have an overall compa ratio of 0.94, but that compa ratios range from 0.57 to 1.47, depending on the specific area of study. The market data for Duluth faculty will be able now to be updated each January 1st, and this will allow Duluth to easily identify faculty areas of study that are farthest behind market. This information, along with knowledge of which specialties are hardest to attract and retain, will provide a roadmap for any potential market adjustments. Duluth faculty are members of the University Education Association, a collective bargaining unit, so any pay increase decisions will need to be reached through the standard bargaining process. And with that, VP Horstman will share the workforce overview.
Thank you, Mary. Chair Hipsch and Regents, in the past, we've been requested to give a summary of the workforce, and that makes sense, and it does lead into my next conversation to finish up our presentation. And we have developed in our HR operations area with our workforce data analytics a number of dashboards that we will assemble into this report in future years. But for now, we wanted to start with the basics and speak to this for a little bit. Our overall employee count remains lower than in 2019, but hiring has returned to the university coming out of the pandemic. And the impact of the RIO and the hiring pause or freeze, as we called it, is not as, in a number sense, still being visible, but what we have seen is the positions that have been hired are more directed into student-facing positions like dining services, in mission-related work like veterinary medical techs, animal research, and in direct academic work. The current employee count, which is from November of 22, which is one of the data slices we take here at the university, also reflects the number of graduate assistants that we have at the university. So that number, which is around 26.7 in this, is still below 2019, and close to 50% of it is direct academic, but also there are supporting positions operationally in the labs and in the vet med area and dining services. Likewise, if we look at our workforce diversity, we do track that. However, this is currently from voluntary information provided by employees, and not all employees choose to provide that. Based on what we have, however, we are seeing incremental increases in faculty and staff of color. This is simply a starting point, given that the self-reported data, as I said, is incomplete. The work that Director Udine has described with Carlson School will enhance our ability to understand the university experience for our BIPOC community and provide a much more complete picture of the life cycle that these employees experience at the university, thereby allowing us to address challenges and opportunities. Turnover coming out of the pandemic has been a wild ride, and for any employer. I mean, it's crazy to look at some of the data, and higher education is included in this. Before the pandemic, the average turnover rate in the US was 18%, and I think many employers will have thought that was exceptionally high at that time. And that is according to the Society for Human Resource Management. But in 2022, the Bureau of Labor Statistics pegged the national turnover rate at 47%. Although public institutions, government jobs, higher education, K through 12, it is lower. As employers compete, employees have many options. The university's turnover rate for fiscal '22 is 12%. If we average the 4 employee groups as we show them on the right side of this chart on turnover, that is the 12% number. I should also say that this does include voluntary departures such as retirement, which average about 500 a year at the university. The internal hire rate is another useful indicator. A study 2 years ago from Cornell and here at Carlson School showed that not only does hiring internally lower costs, but employees hired from within an organization are more likely to be highly performing, more engaged, and easier to retain. A lesson out of the retirement risk zone, which we track monthly in our office, I think speaks to a possibility for the future given labor shortages in Minnesota. In the future, we will have a need to consider how to be flexible or even more flexible with current faculty and staff as they enter the retirement zone, and here we define it as age 55 or above. And when possible, look for ways to retain certain talent in a different capacity. The university is well positioned for that opportunity, and that many do wish to continue a connection to the university as they transition away from a full-time work life. And in starting that process, our office does partner with the University of Minnesota Retirement Association to reach out to all recently retired employees and connect them. So if we truly believe what we have discussed here today and what runs through the information we have provided in our report, then there are critical musts that have to take place and are not only the accountability of human resources, but truly the accountability of anyone who views themselves as a leader at the university. You heard Director Sullivan talk about the modules, the tools, the expertise that we have brought into development and training of leaders and supervisors. Prospective leaders and those of us currently in leadership roles, however, must commit to continuous development of our own competencies and our awareness of where we need to improve. Through this process, we will become better prepared to meet our obligations as leaders. These programs have been developed, as I said, and are popular and in high demand. We do need to make further progress, and it really shouldn't be an optional pursuit for a leader to develop. No leader comes to their role fully formed, and usually we don't leave that role being fully formed either, so it's a continuous process. Supervisor training should be required. Again, wonderful programs that are highly popular on a voluntary basis, and we have high demand for them, are available through different channels in our office, and so we are making significant progress. I've always had the belief that anyone who supervises even one employee should complete basic supervisory training to understand how to support that employee through their own development, discuss performance in a respectful manner, in a clear and concise manner, plan for improvements and recognize accomplishments, and manage the need for improvement when necessary. New supervisors at the university are entering an exceptionally complex environment. I know many of my colleagues have come from corporate and other nonprofit backgrounds, public institutions, international corporations. And we collectively look at this environment as maybe being the most complex employment environment we've ever worked in. And with that, a new supervisor enters it needing to know policy, rules, labor contracts, and how to work within those guardrails. And without training, and that's just the basic pieces, but also development of their own skills, how can they have the confidence to do that? So our office is moving forward in the future from a position that we will have an expectation that supervisors and prospective supervisors have those resources available. And we would recommend a module of required training and refresher training each year for all supervision. And we would like the support of the board in that endeavor. Surveys are also a source of great information. The university has completed a climate survey recently. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of our engagement survey, which has been recognized by peer institutions for its sustainability and its success. We're going to have a survey this fall. The colleges, units, campuses, and departments that have done the hard work post-survey by meeting with and listening to faculty and staff respond on the context behind why they answered questions a certain way have realized positive outcomes of that willingness to thoroughly engage, and their subsequent engagement survey metrics certainly point this out. If a campus, college, or unit has not made such a follow-up a priority, their survey outcomes will reflect that as well. Leadership should be expected to foster and lead this work. Many institutions do so by making it a part of a leader's performance review, and some even place salary at risk to make this point clear. Without follow-up, it is just another survey, but with follow-up, it can be transformational. And so those are some possibilities we're considering certainly for the future to take that work further and see the fruits of that work. Technology must support administrative processes as we work through implementation of PEAK. Current technology will play a big role in the capabilities of our operations centers, and we are aware that and grateful that we have the technology currently necessary to implement PEAK. However, once processes have been redefined, the university will be at a stage when technology to support employment will eventually become a more prominent risk management topic than it is today. So the university must engage in a purposeful discussion on changing technology needs in the employment setting, and the timing of this would appear to be post-PEAK phase 2 implementation, which is probably the middle of next calendar year. And we want to do that not to immediately ask for an implementation, but to have a thoughtful discussion before that time becomes imminent. So I refer to these three opportunities as obligations. Each will play a role in the experience faculty, staff, and students have at the university and to what degree they have clarity in their role, understand what resources are available to them, and how they may see the university not only as an ongoing career, but where they can thrive. And with that, our presentation concludes. And Chair Hips, we certainly welcome questions or discussion.
Thank you for your presentation. That was a really great presentation. And the question I guess I'm trying to understand is on turnover. I know, we have a lot of turnover. I mean, society does now. People can move around more. They're more mobile, whatever. They're more remote. So I get that. But I'm trying to understand, how do you count turnover in terms of if somebody gets promoted up to a different level or gets moved over, is that a turnover or is it a person? I mean, and some of the turnover in the college is planned because students graduate and, so can you just explain that a little bit more?
Certainly, Chair Hippich. Yeah. Turnover, the way it's defined on the chart that we provided, is someone who terminates employment at the university and completely leaves the university. Okay. So internal movement to another unit, moving into a greater opportunity to a posted position, that would not be turnover.
Okay, thank you. Regent Turner.
Yes. Vice President Horstman, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I've just recently, in my other life as a labor leader, I have often found that anxiety amongst staff is often due to lack of communication. I bet we can say that 99.9% of the time. And I've recently gotten a list of an email with like 8 different concerns. And it's very much that. You know, when they hear the project peak and there's a lot of assumptions as to what they think it is. I hope it does, you know, that it's everything from layoffs. Of course, then I hear Senior Vice President Franz say the other day that we don't have enough people here. So anyway, that's just some of the concerns and how do they apply for stuff? And I could very much give you that list, but often, no, it is always communication that needs to be, you just need to come to the table. Are you hearing me here?
I am.
I really, yeah. A lot of their concerns are just communication.
Chair Hips, Regent Turner, I couldn't agree more. And we are in a process with peak that does raise anxiety, does raise uncertainty, and that's not a good feeling. What I think we often don't compare it to is if we did nothing, there likely might be less anxiety, there would still be there, but we would not be controlling change, it would be controlling us. So that is really what we're attempting to do. There has been a significant amount of communication on peak in the last 2 years. We are getting to a point now where it's becoming real. And, you know, we are talking to people individually. We're talking to people in the units who manage these people and getting more detail. And that changes our outlook of how we'll implement because we learn that way. And the next step is to actually talk to the employees who might be eligible or affected by this in that first phase and have them tell us what they're thinking about this. And we'll have conversations and dialogues around that. But we continue to look at our communication strategy on that topic and others. We know we can always do better. This is a place that thrives on a certain, many different channels of communication, and sometimes we do not get it right, but we keep trying. And we are dedicated to that. I would be very open to listening to what you have heard and taking that so we can do better.
I'll give you the list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Tad Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Vice President Horstman and group. I still have friends at UMD, a couple of them are here today, but UMD has a working, salary working group, and they are interested in if CUPA data is more representative and potentially more accurate, why not use the same data set for all campuses? And the second question is something you could get me later, but can you provide UMD's COMPA ratio using the AAUP data as well? And you can get me that when you can.
Well, I'll, Chair Hips, Regent Johnson, I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Senior Director Roman Kuhl. We involved UEA leadership in that compensation study for UMD faculty. They were at the table with us when we designed that new study that really broke it out by area of academic study. And it went really well, and I think they appreciated the new information. We did that as, we started it because UEA wanted it, and we realized it would be an opportunity. And we're going to use that in the future to apply it to non-unionized faculty at the university in the Twin Cities and the like. But it is a significant project. It is a heavy lift, so we have to plan that out with other priorities. But that is something we want to do. Senior Director Roman Kuhl, do you have any other thoughts?
So Chair Hips, Regents, I would just add, I would echo that it is our interest to use the Coupa data. And actually, there are other surveys. There's some business surveys we could use for the Carlson School of Management and other types of professors in different areas of study. So we have a large set of surveys at our disposal. And we can use Coupa or those other surveys when we get to market refine our other campus locations for faculty. And those are projects we want to get to. Those are things that we care about and want to conduct, are these market studies for faculty. And until that time, the key variable here is going through every faculty member and assigning that CIP code. Are you molecular biology? Are you chemistry? What is it that you're actually doing? And that is the link that's needed to get to the data set. So once we got the link for Duluth, and the faculty were all involved and very participative in helping to pick their CIP code, then we could go into that Coupa data set and start linking up the data. What we decided to do is continue to use this AAUP data that we've used in the past for all the campus locations that don't have those CIP codes assigned yet. And we can pull the Duluth comp ratio using the AAUP data set. I don't think it's as valuable because what we're doing with, and we've said this in previous Regent reports, what we're doing is you're taking all of the salaries in total for all the professors at a certain location, and you're comparing that to all of the salaries of their peer institutions in this AAUP data set. And it's not taking into account their area of specialty, and it's not taking into account your rank, so associate, full professor, for example. So you change anything, like if we have more engineering professors or more chemistry professors, they usually are a little bit higher market base, and so it can throw off your comparison numbers. So we can provide it. We don't really recommend using it to make decisions. We think much more so this refined approach that uses the Coupa data with the CIP code, that's the real deal. That's going to give you direction for your pay increase decisions. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last question is to Regent Gully.
This was something of a response to Regent Turner's comment, or follow-up on that, I guess, that I've also received the same sorts of questions about the initiative, and there seems to be a ton of anxiety around it. And in fact, I'm getting emails from people asking us to pause the Peak Initiative because they're so concerned about what's going to happen.
Excuse me, Regent Gully, could you pull your microphone in a little
sorry.
bit? Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm getting emails from people who are having a lot of anxiety about their jobs, and we're in a time where people can leave very easily and go find other jobs, and we know that we need to retain people, and part of that is making them feel safe in their jobs. Mm-hmm. And I've heard from SVP Franz that that we need more people in these jobs and not less. And that, to me, says that we have got to figure out how to quell some of these anxieties so we don't have people walking out the door from their jobs because they're worried that they don't have job security. And actually, I'm going to take this and address sort of a little bit of an elephant in the room as well and say that I was pretty alarmed at what the reaction that I saw when the protesters came in. And I'd like for us to dig into that a little bit more as a group. I think that, those are our students, and they have every right to address us, and I don't see any room on our agenda for them to address us. And so in that case, that's not surprising that they're feeling a lot of anxiety. And I think we have to figure out how to have public comment, how to invite them in, how to give them space to have these conversations with us. And certainly, we should not be threatening to arrest them when they walk in to have a conversation with us. And that, to me, is just going to increase the anxiety that they're having about these programs, and also makes us look very thin-skinned. And, part of this role is being able to take critique and dissent and being able to take it and use it to be better. And so I'd like to encourage us to have that conversation and to really think about having space on our agenda for people to address the board. And I think that that will really help a lot with the anxiety that people are feeling about new programs and implementation. So I guess that's not really a question as much as a comment, but I appreciate you presenting all this information. And I think anything that we can do to make the university better is great. We just have to bring our community along with us.
Chair Hips, Regent Gullery, I just have one comment because I do appreciate your perspective. Jobs change whether we change them or not. And so what we're trying to do is be thoughtful about how we move forward into the future. And if you go throughout the university right now, there's actually a lot of anxiety with people about what do they go do next, because there are people who love doing a variety of things, and maybe they have too many variety of things to do, and we have to look at that, which is part of peak. But we also have people that just simply, because of that decentralization and fragmentation, cannot honestly see what their next step in life is here. And so we're trying to find that balance where we improve that as well. And also, to the point of hiring is tough, if we organize this work better, as we go forward, there probably is an avoidance in the amount of hiring we have to do to get this work done, and we can use those resources in more impactful ways in our mission. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. I would love to reduce anxiety. I think this is a project that will plod from person to person and discussion to discussion to do it well. We can't just be super prescriptive on a template that we think will work everywhere or it'll fail. So there is going to be a lot of that going forward.
Of course, of course. Anything that we can do to support those conversations and helping to improve communications and stuff. I know there's a bargaining committee over it, and as I understand anyway, and so, but I'd love to be helpful in that way as
I appreciate the offer. I really do.
Thank you, Regent. Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, and I will say that I too need to understand better what has been done, what we can do to invite public comment, but I'm still learning, brand new. But my question is on the diversity, the equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And, I know that that's an impact goal about retaining and recruiting diverse talent, and it's a huge goal. It's what we need really to grow and perform and lead. I mean, it's a really important thing. What I see on the impact goals are mostly outcome goals about increasing percentages of BIPOC or underrepresented faculty, student, staff. I think you, Director Udine, made a great point about we have to have fertilized soil to be able to do that. So I'm wondering, as a Board of Regents member, what kind of leading indicators might we look for to look at what is culturally being done to provide the ground so we can actually get more representation that's needed for us all?
Thank you for that, Regent Wheeler and Chair Hips. One of the key things, and this has been evident in the work that I've done here for the 10 months, but you and I have a small history from my pre-existing existence in healthcare. What we know is that we need to look at the root cause of some of those cultural nuances that are occurring in the institution. And what are some of the barriers that inhibit internal mobility? Because the reality is, if we don't take care of the small population of diverse talent that we currently have, we certainly can't recruit more because we talk. We tell stories. We share experiences with others. And so when people decide to come to an organization or an institution like this, they go to people they know and they ask them to tell me what the experience is like. So that's the reason why that foundational work is so critical.
Right.
And so I think what we really need to do is dig into the root cause of that. In my initial rotation and going throughout the university, those were some of the questions I asked. And I heard a lot of questions and commentary centered around data. And so we know the qualitative because everybody shared their lived experience with me, but we went back to the Carlson students and utilized that project to talk about what is the life cycle, where are the barriers, where are the things that happen that inhibit mobility of those who've already made that commitment, and then how do we start to correct that and interrogate those barriers so that when we bring new talent in, we keep them. And we looked at a span of 18 to 24 months because when you bring someone into an organization, organization, that's typically when people make the decision whether they're going to stay or leave. So what is that experience like, and how can we mitigate those barriers that might exist? So that's some of the work that we're currently doing and will continue to do in collaboration with our partners throughout the institution. And then I think, quite frankly, the success is talking to people outside of our bubble. What's happening in your industry, in your institution, and talking to those Big Ten leaders. I'm part of a DEI consortium with the other leaders in DEI work. What's going on in your space? And so I think those things are really critical to start to move the needle on retention and for recruitment of diverse talent.
And follow-up. Chair Hips, one follow-up, and then it would be great through that work and looking at the root causes was exactly the right thing, is like what we should look for. How will we know that actually that culture is being, is it, boy, what does the retention look like in 18 to 24 months? I don't know what it actually is, but I would love a sight line to, okay, the ground is more fertilized, so we're actually likely to move those percentages and be able to grow, perform, and lead in the right way.
Yeah, dashboards are critical. If you don't measure what's important to you, you'll never know if you're making progress. And so that's part of the strategy as well, to make sure that we're keeping a measurement, a set of metrics that help us see what success looks like and where we need to drill in deeper in certain key areas.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation today, and we're going to move on to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Or Chair Hips, can I just, I would like to
Oh, I didn't
respond.
see your name.
That's
Okay.
all right. I just wanted to respond to Regent Gully's comment about input and just make some overall observations, because I appreciate what you're saying. I can say from my experience on the board and since Peak started, that the consultative process was very much, is part of the underpinnings of Peak. And in terms of consulting with a variety of different constituencies, including those who were impacted, going to be or potentially impacted as well. So trying to get their input in the development is certainly something that our HR group did with the outside consultants. In addition, on your comment about seeking input from the students, that's something that we have been working on here as a board as to what is the appropriate mechanism to obtain input. Obviously, we have representatives here who sit with us, but how do we get input from others via the emails we get, the portals we create, and we're also talking about, we've been debating, do we set aside time at our meetings to have the students or any interested party come in and talk to us, balancing that against the fact that we have work to get done over these 2 days as well. And to me, the interesting thing that happened here, these people were not on our agenda, students, but we all sat here in the room and we listened, and it wasn't, I don't think, lost on anyone about what they were saying or the importance of what they were saying. So I just want to say, we have a very collaborative and consultative environment. We are working to get input. We will keep looking at ways to get input, but also to conduct our work, but very sensitive to what you are saying here. So thank you for your remarks, but I wanted to give a context to them as well.
Thank you for that, Regent Mayeron. Okay, our fourth item is review of proposed off-cycle amendments to Board of Regents policy on the endowment fund. Here to outline those amendments are Chief Investment Officer Stuart Mason and Deputy Chief Investment Officer Andrew Parks. Senior Vice President France, would you like to start us off?
Chair Hips, yes, I would. I'm glad to see our Chief Investment Officer and Deputy Chief Investment Officer here today. The next agenda item is really targeted on some revisions to our endowment fund board policy. Now, we want to present it today for review and for action in June. The targeted discussion today is about two aspects. One is the asset allocation strategy for the fund, and the second one is about the ESG factors that are incorporated into the investment process. ESG meaning environmental, social, and governance. I just want to make one more highlight before turning it over, and that's that these proposed revisions to the policy were really broadly consulted around the university with a variety of stakeholders and several governance groups comprised of students, faculty, and staff from across the university system. We had many conversations, great conversations that the Chief Investment Officer Mason can talk about, but it was a great appreciation by people around the university for seeking their input. In addition to that internal consultation, The proposed changes were reviewed with our Investment Advisory Committee, which is a group of external investment experts who advise the Director Mason and Deputy Chief Investment Officer Andrew Parks on our investment strategies, and they were very supportive and thoughtful about this process as well. So I'd like to turn the conversation over to Mr. Mason and Mr. Parks, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Hips, Senior Vice President France, and committee. First of all, I'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Stuart Mason. I'm a Chief Investment Officer. I've been here at the university for 21 years, and with my colleague Andrew Parks, the Deputy Chief Investment Officer, we manage the Office of Investments and Banking, which is responsible for managing all of the university's $4.5 billion financial assets, excluding the foundation assets, which are different. So the banking and the investing of all of the different pools of assets the university has. We're here today to talk about the $2.1 billion long-term endowment fund and some policy changes that we're recommending that have been reviewed by a number of committees and consultative groups, as Senior Vice President Franz mentioned. The two issues that we want to have you focus on today, as has been mentioned, are changes in the asset allocation framework, which is really how and where we invest the money. And the second issue is inclusion of additional statements that underscore our commitment to including factors of environmental, social, and governance in a more robust way in the overall investment process. So those are the two issues. Andrew, if you want to start with some comments about the asset allocation framework.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Chair Hibsch and members of the board for having us. So to address this issue of asset allocation related policy changes, what I like to do is focus on three things. The first is to talk about the purpose and the structure of the endowment to level set. The second is to talk about the current asset allocation framework, just to provide a baseline. And then the third is to talk about the proposed changes to the framework. And the one key takeaway that I'll leave you with is that these proposed changes are pretty incremental, not transformational. And they're really intended to give us a bit more flexibility in allocating to strategies in which we have conviction and that have served us well here in the recent past. So to get started, we'll go to, I think it's your slide 271, and I'll try to provide a little bit of an Endowment 101 overview. And so at a very high level, you can think of an endowment as trying to promote what's referred to as intergenerational neutrality. So it's this concept that if you have a permanent pool of capital from which you take an annual draw, which in our case is 4.5%, and if you're able to grow that and match that 4.5% withdrawal, plus expenses, plus inflation, then you'll end up having an annual payout that on an inflation-adjusted basis will be proportionate both for current and future generations of students and researchers who benefit from it. Now, moreover, if we're able to not just match but exceed that inflation plus 5% target, then obviously the recipients in the university have some additional financial flexibility. That's ultimately what we aim to do. Now, this goal is very relevant to informing how we think about risk tolerance and our return objectives. And when you think of risk tolerance, you can think of it as having two components. There's willingness and there's ability. So endowments have the structural ability to take on a lot of risk, and that's because the capital is very sticky. The payouts are very predictable. They're based on a 5-year smoothing. The payouts today represent a pretty small portion of the university's operating budget, and we have a time horizon that is effectively infinite. When you look at the inflation plus 5% return hurdle, we also have a willingness to take on a lot of risk, if not a structural mandate to do so, because it's very hard to generate those type of returns if you just invest in low risk bonds. And so it's really this alignment between the risk constraints and the return objectives that informs how we think about portfolio construction. So with that as a preamble, what we did when we initially set out to build the current asset allocation framework is we started to think about our guiding principles. And when you think of an asset allocation framework, it's really just simply the mix that you have in a portfolio, the target mix between stocks and bonds. And it's one of the most important decisions that we make when we manage an investment program. And the guiding principles that we have, I won't go through them all in detail, but they are related to maintaining thoughtful liquidity management practices, maintaining diversification, maintaining flexibility, leaning into strategies that are operating in less efficient markets. And importantly, we believe we're living in an era of innovation where we wanted to have a lot of exposure to strategies in the private markets, particularly venture capital that we think can benefit from that. Now, another key principle that we had was to maintain a long-term focus. So we talk about looking more at the destination than the journey. So the idea being the ride could be bumpy, the returns can be somewhat lumpy, but we think having exposure to these higher octane strategies is ultimately going to be beneficial to the endowment in the long term. Now, to be clear, that means it's not an all-weather strategy. There are going to be cyclical ups and downs, but these were key inputs to how we thought about developing the strategy. And again, they're very well integrated to these risk constraints and return objectives. So what you'll see here on this slide is what manifested from that original asset allocation re-underwriting process, and we ended up putting all of our strategies into 3 buckets. So the first bucket is the stability bucket. You'll see on the left side, that has a target of 8%. That's just to meet our programmatic liquidity needs, very safe, low-risk investments in U.S. Treasuries and agencies. I guess it's safe unless the federal government defaults next month, in which case that'll be another discussion. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have the growth bucket, which is really the workhorse of the fund. So that's today 62%. That's equity oriented. So we have public equities, private equity, venture capital, et cetera, diversified across the globe. And then in the middle category, we have a sleeve we call diversifiers, which is a bit more eclectic, but it has strategies that are intended to provide a cushion when equity markets struggle, maybe zig when the equity markets zag, or just have underlying exposures that don't look much like equities. So with that being said, as the current framework, what we're proposing here, again, is rather incremental. So you'll see the shift is that we're proposing is to take 3% out of the stability bucket, move it over to the equity bucket, and then the second is to take a bit of the illiquidity budget, which is represented here in these slanted lines, and move it over to the equity bucket. So the target goes from 50 to 55%. And it's worth noting that these illiquid investments have really been the drivers of performance over this last decade. We just had an investment committee meeting yesterday that Regent Hipsch chaired, and we were talking about how 10 years ago we had about a quarter of the fund in private equity and venture. Today it's about half. Over that same time period, the private equity and venture strategies more than doubled the public markets. So that tilting really added a lot of value. And to put some numbers to it, it's basically about $1 billion of excess return over what we would have had we just invested globally in a passive mix of stocks and bonds. So while the changes are incremental, we think that they're well aligned with areas that, as I said at the onset, we have conviction in, and that's really the basis of the proposal. The next slide, which I believe is 274 in your deck, has some of the specifics of the compare and contrast of the current relative to the proposed framework, most of which I've already touched on. So I think with that, I will pause and turn it back to Stuart to talk about the ESG-related provisions.
Thanks, Andrew. On the ESG side, as Senior Vice President Franz mentioned, it's been a couple of year-long process with a great deal of consultative touch base along the way. The process started 2.5 years ago with intensive discussions with our Investment Advisory Committee, the outsiders that Myron referred to, that give us industry knowledge, industry advice, and really help us form strategic objectives across a broad spectrum of different topics. We then refined the ESG language, if you will, and the inclusion of it, and began to consult internally. So it's important to note that we, in the past year, have consulted with senior administration, including the President's office, Myron's office, and others, the Faculty Senate and the Student Senate consultative committees have been extensively consulted with, the Senate Committee on Finance and Planning, the Undergraduate Student Government Committee, and others. We've met individually with smaller student groups over the period of time, and collectively, I think, as you can imagine, there's been very little discussion or feedback on the issues that Andrew just discussed. They're pretty much in the weeds and not much interest there. The committees did, however, have some interest in the inclusion of ESG-related topics, as you can imagine. And so there was some very constructive conversation in each one of those consultative interactions. And I think a general consensus has been achieved that that it's important to have the investment processes of the university align with the mission and goals across many different fronts, including their commitment to sustainability and environmental issues, social and governance-related priorities. So we've, in an effort to frame the discussion with these various groups, we've used this graphic to illustrate where we are ending up in terms of our positioning as it relates to all of these issues collectively. On the far left-hand side, you can see columns that have characteristics of being antagonistic or just uninterested at all in inclusion of these priorities. On the far right-hand side, there are foundations in the Twin Cities and across the country that do impact investing, where their primary objective is having an impact in the community and a certain subset of underserved individuals or community members. We are not either of those. We have landed clearly in what we've referred to as the middle, being ESG aware. So we have integrated, and we've been in the process over the past years of integrating ESG-related issues very actively into the decision-making process about all the investments that we make. And what does that look like? It really means, as you can see from the center column, that investment criteria are still an absolute must-have. They are the highest priority. However, the ESG-related criteria have been elevated to being very important elements in the broader context of the decision-making process. And that has manifested itself by us investing in the public equity markets, in index funds that have a tilt towards environmental, social, and governance factors greater than the broader market has. We've invested in low-carbon index funds. We've invested in private markets, in investments that promote alternative energy sources and alternative energy distribution mechanisms and highlight issues around governance and social issues. Our team is well known for being very attentive to outside managers that are women-owned or owned and run by other minority groups. In fact, last year, 43% of the funds that we engaged with were in that category of women-owned or minority-owned management companies. So what are the specific changes as it relates to ESG? They're really twofold. The current policy says that the university shall consider environmental responsibilities. And we're proposing changing that to put a more emphasis on it, where it will read, the university shall integrate ESG-related investment decisions that are consistent with the mission and values of the university. And secondly, that the president is being directed to, or delegate being directed to maintain a statement defining what these principles actually are. And you can see a copy of the current version of that statement of principles on page 268 of your materials. The second piece is the policy is being changed to essentially beef up the transparency of what we're doing in this regard. So it calls upon us to expand our annual report to this group, as well as the public, as it relates to what we're specifically doing as concerning emerging minority and women-owned investment firms, as well as all of the environmental, social, and governance-related issues that we're integrating into the portfolio. This page I present to you simply as an example of the expanded reporting which we'd begun last year for our fiscal 22 annual report to the board taking place last fall. And you can see this is one of a couple of pages that really highlights what we're doing. You can see on the right-hand side of the dashboard a variety of different issues that call out the dollar amounts and the number of managers and some of the specific investments that we're making in climate or climate-related activities. And on the right-hand side, because at least in the current environment, fossil fuels has been an issue of interest on the part of many of the constituents. We've called out our total exposure to fossil fuel companies being 2.5%, which, by the way, is a small number and well below many or most of our peers, and to also describe the fact that this number is being reduced annually and will be a much smaller number in the future. So that's just an example of some of the expanded reporting that's already in place. And I think with that, Chair Hipsch, we'd be open to questions.
Well, thank you both. Yesterday, I got a chance to be at the meeting, and I can tell you that the group was very enthusiastic about these changes, and they really do a great job. You guys both do a great job of investing our money and with good responsibility, so thank you for that. Are there any questions? Okay, we have one with Representative Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. I don't have a question, but I had a couple comments for the presenters. I, again, wanted to highlight the fantastic consulting work that have been done by the two presenters and then the other folks who have worked on this policy. This is the second time I've heard this because Mr. Mason and Mr. Parks, as well, I think you brought Jessica LeBlanc, who is the assistant to Vice President Franz, to our executive board meeting with undergraduate student government. So I will say we were, I think, one of the groups who got into the nitty-gritty weeds of what Mr. Parks was talking about, because when you put a bunch of social policy nerds in a room, that's really what happens. But I had colleagues in the Student Senate who interacted with this presentation multiple times in different venues. So we sincerely appreciate the efforts that your team has made to solicit the feedback from students and making changes, and also of really ensuring that everyone you spoke with understood the policies and what those changes and language alterations really meant, and what that looks like for the university in the future. So yeah, this is a policy shift that I think I would be remiss to say if that it wouldn't have occurred without student advocacy. Our undergraduate student government has been pushing, in collaboration with other student groups and other students, for fossil fuel divestment since 2013, I believe. So we sincerely appreciate that you both have respected the work that students have done and continue to, again, really treat students like the critical stakeholders in the university that they are. And so, yeah, I wanted to highlight those efforts for the rest of the room, because I really think that's the standard of how we should create new programs and policy changes across the university. It's a prime example of how a student movement and policy change at the university level incorporates the people who've really done the work. So I thank you for your efforts, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the impacts of this change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a comment, and then I'll turn a question to the presenters. Really great discussion, as the student representative said, and I think we were able to kind of intro or preview this with Chief Sustainability Officer Stennis, who's still watching over there. But really, really great stuff. My comment or question, perhaps look this way for it, is we know that a lot of our endowment, or I guess a separate endowment, is held in trust by the foundation. It would be interesting to just find out some similar details of there. Of course, we know there's good governance on that side, but just as an information item, perhaps next time we have President Schmidlkoffer in front of us.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and could you guys speak to that at all?
Yes, thank you for the question or the observation. We serve on a committee, Andrew and I serve on a committee with the foundation as they are crafting their own position as it relates to these issues. And so they've hired an outside consultant about 6 months ago. They're meeting monthly in executive session. We are part of those discussions to give the flavor of where the university itself has been going and recount our journey to get to this point. They do have a different constituent and different priorities to some degree, and so their policy ultimately, I would suspect, is not going to be identical to ours, our position, I should say. However, they are actively working on it. I'm really pleased with the progress they're making. The consultant's been very helpful, and they, in fact, have been making good use of our spectrum of agnostic to aware and so forth as a way of thinking about their own positioning on that spectrum.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's really good to learn that, you know, there's that kind of close connection. I didn't assume you'd be able to answer it, but I'm pleasantly surprised to hear that from you. So my question, again, lending my ignorance for the community's committee's benefit, looking at the timeline, the re-underwriting timeline. I mean, this process or conversation started in 2020. That was the kickoff meeting, so you're probably thinking about it even before that. And here we are, obviously in Mr. Parks, I think you said that, I mean, the timeline is essentially indefinite, you know, with this kind of foundation. So obviously when you look on that kind of timeline, it's not that long, you know, 3 years is not that long. And, you know, I appreciate why we have these governance steps and kind of has to go through a thorough process. I'm curious if that limits your flexibility, if you will, in any way. I imagine, I mean, you still have a lot of flexibility within the allocation and whatnot, but as you're trying to change that percentage and you have to wait 3 years, and Jerome Powell is doing stuff, you know, just about every other month. Is that limiting to your ability to get us more money, quite frankly?
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. I think the observations are spot on for a couple of reasons. One is, one of the things we work intentionally to do is structure the Board of Regents policy document, or at least advise that it gets structured in such a way that it does give us enough flexibility, really independent of market environment. And while it seems like these incremental changes of going up or down 3% are ones that are that potentially we would want to do more often, we do have ranges around these that give us a lot of flexibility in which to operate, and those have been really helpful in the last couple of years as the market environment has really shifted. And then the other thing I'll just candidly mention is that the review process really had two components. It was the asset allocation piece, which I think took a little bit less time, given the environmental, social, and governance related issues are kind of a package deal as it relates to how the policy is drafted. We wanted to make sure we went through a thorough process of consultation, really that extended the timeline that led to us ultimately coming here today. But I think as a practical matter, purely looking at it from an investments perspective, we've been really encouraged by the support of the board over many years with these changes, and I would say that they do give us the degrees of latitude and flexibility that we work very hard with the Investment Advisory Committee to operate under.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for presenting today. So, okay. We're going to move our next item in review is a review of one real estate transaction, and is Assistant Vice President Leslie Kruger. Vice President Franz, will you introduce the item and outline the situation?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. Well, Assistant Vice President Krieger needs no introduction in this particular case because this is a very straightforward part of her portfolio that she handles really well. So I'll just let her jump right in if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. Today, I present for you the review of the acquisition of 0.75 acres of land on the south end of downtown Rochester to support the long-term development of the University of Minnesota Rochester campus. The property is currently owned by the YMCA and has been used as surface parking to support their now closed facility across First Avenue Southwest. The parcel, which is shown in turquoise on your map, is adjacent to other university-owned parcels and is within the future UMR campus boundaries that were identified in the 2014 UMR campus plan, which is scheduled for update this coming year. The acquisition of this property will ultimately advance all 4 of the region's guiding principles for real estate transactions. Land banking for the future campus development supports UMR's mission as well as the campus plan. It provides strategic value for the university and will ultimately lead to a positive impact on downtown Rochester. The purchase price for this transaction is $2.1 million, which is in alignment with the appraised value for the property. The seller will be an LLP established by Enclave Companies, who is under contract to acquire the YMCA's 5 parcels along First Avenue Southwest in July. Enclave will then sell the surface parking lot parcel to the university. Enclave intends to develop multifamily housing on the Wise parcels to the east across the street, and these parcels were not included in the 2014 campus plan. Following execution of the purchase and sale agreement, the university will deposit $75,000 of earnest money with the title company, and that earnest money will be applied to the purchase price at close. The university's due diligence period plans to run through July 10th, 2023, with a closing planned for August 16th. We may elect to extend the due diligence period until August 15th and thereby extending the closing if needed for an additional $75,000 of earnest money. As part of our due diligence, the university has already completed a Phase 1 environmental site assessment and will complete a Phase 2 environmental site assessment to confirm the property is an acceptable environmental condition prior to closing. And this concludes my summary of the transaction, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, this item is up for review. What we like to do always is to bring items for review to the committee and then have action next month. I don't anticipate any new additional facts between now and next month. I would politely suggest maybe we're ready to move on to action. Entertain that.
Is there any objection to moving this?
Well, Regent Turner has.
Go ahead, Regent Turner.
She just said something about an environmental study. Is that something that would just blow the deal if all of a sudden it wasn't environmentally sound?
Chair Hipsch, Regent Turner, we traditionally, as part of our university policy, we always start with a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. And then if there are any findings as part of that Phase 1 environmental assessment, we do proceed to a Phase 2, which includes more invasive testing and borings. We're very familiar with this area, having purchased properties around directly adjacent to this property. And so there was one environmental finding associated with it because of some of the environmental conditions on the adjacent properties that we already own. We don't, so we may find something in those borings, we may or may not. Where it's something that we attend to on a regular basis. When we ultimately redevelop this property, all of the properties around here, we will have to do some environmental remediation. So I don't anticipate that we would find anything in this case that would create such a concern that we would not acquire the property. But we will go through the environmental testing process. We would then, if there is a finding, we would proceed with the MPCA for a no association determination and proceed from there. But again, because of our due diligence period, if there was something extremely significant that we would find, we would be able to terminate the purchase and sale agreement at that time.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and explain the process here, Jason?
Sure. Chair Hipsch, members of the committee, under Board of Regents Policy, Board Operations and Agenda Guidelines, Section 5, Subdivision 3, you can move an item from review to review and action as long as no one objects. If a single regent were to object, then we would wait and the item would return for action at a subsequent meeting, depending on when that was placed on the agenda. In this case, likely the June meeting.
Regent Kenyanya, did you have?
I did. Mr. Chair, am I commenting on just question on the presentation, or are we now discussing the
We're discussing whether we should move this to review and from review to action for tomorrow's meeting.
Okay. Well, I will hold my comment.
Okay. Is there any objection to moving this to action? Okay.
I move to move this to, do we need a motion?
Oh, yeah.
No, you don't need
Then
it.
Okay.
Now you can.
Now, hearing no objection, there's a motion to recommend approval of the purchase of the YMCA parking lot parcel on First Avenue Southwest, Rochester. So all those in favor?
Right, so moved, and then you need a
Second.
So moved.
Oh, okay, you moved, you,
I second.
okay, Jane said.
Now, any further discussion?
Now, is there any further discussion? Regent Kenyanya, go ahead.
Thank
I'm
you,
just-
Chair Langworthy.
Well, there's a lot of, there's a lot of,
You're right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I mean, I want to express support for, I mean, not just this transaction, but, you know, the plan that we have for UMR and the vision, you know, to have that campus have its own space and the proper space that students and faculty deserve to learn and educate. My question is, is there, and maybe I missed it, is there an identified use, or are we just accumulating the land and the plan will follow?
Chair Hips, Regent Kenyanya, the 2014 campus plan for UMR, which is the currently adopted plan, does call for this land at this southern end in the what's called the Education District to have a series of campus facilities associated with the property. We will be updating the campus plan in this upcoming year, and so we anticipate that that might change and the timeline might change at that point in time. But this land, as you can see here, all of the land in gold on this map is currently owned by the university and is currently being land banked by the university for the future campus development.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. And I think you answered it just at the end. So as I look at all these owned properties, I mean, there's no concrete plan of this one is housing versus this one is classroom. That plan will follow after we have the land, correct?
Chair Hips, Regent Kenyanya, the current campus plan does identify phasing for buildings and facilities, and I can send you the link to the campus plan, but that will be revisited this coming year as part of the new Rochester campus plan.
Thank you.
is there any, Regent Johnson?
Yeah, Regent Hips, thank you. Just a comment. We have been deliberate, slow, careful in all the kind of property acquisitions in Rochester. This has not been a rapid thing of buying up a lot. Everything has been given a good deal of thought and is to serve a really important purpose. And I think this is just one more. We've got that other property. This will give us a lot of good, other possibilities for us to build.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Well, we did get through that, but barely. Okay, moving on to the agenda. We look at, we're at the consent, yep. So we're at the consent agenda. So Senior Vice President Franz, will you summarize the items in today's consent report?
Mr. Chair, I would love to. So first of all, we have 7 different purchases of goods and services in the consent report. We have 1 capital budget amendment. We have 5 employment agreements, and we have 3 real estate transactions. First of all, I'd like to highlight 3 of the purchases for your specific review. First is the contract for our Medica Health Plan for the 2-year period of January 2024 through December 2025 with options to extend through 2029. This purchase is for the university's medical plan that provides medical coverage to approximately over 19,000 employees and their dependents. Medica was selected as a result of an RFP process conducted between October 2022 and March of 2023. The second purchase I'd like to highlight is for services from the Unum Group for disability coverage and claims administration for eligible employees across the university system for the period January 2024 through December 2024. Third, I would like to bring your attention to the contract for services with Videotronics for safety and security system services for PSECC, that is our Public Safety Emergency Communications Center. This contract is necessary to accelerate efforts to upgrade, enhance, and replace end-of-life equipment related to video surveillance, card access, and alarms that make up the university's security systems. The contract will provide dedicated services and resources to the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses and bolster existing resources for the Twin Cities campus. This work is imperative to our ability to better secure facilities, increase visibility for public safety responders during incidents, and improve our abilities to solve and prevent crime around the university and surrounding areas. We also have one capital budget amendment for your approval today. This amendment is for the emergency repairs to the Northup Auditorium caused by the heavy snow this past winter. This amendment will allow us to repair damage caused by the failure of the east parapet wall. Now, we expect much of this cost to be covered by insurance. Some of our forensic work suggests that it's prudent to rebuild the west parapet wall to similar standards while we engage in this. That expense is one that the university would incur outside of the insurance claim to protect the building and other infrastructure for the long term. Now, in the employment agreement area, we have 5 agreements for your consideration. We have the agreement for Janet Erickson as the next chancellor for the Morris campus. We have the appointment of Paul Hanstad as the new vice chancellor of academic affairs and innovation in Rochester. For the Crookston campus, we have the agreement for Rosemary Erickson Johnson as the new senior vice chancellor for academic affairs. We have the agreement for Dawn Plitzuweit, our new head women's basketball coach. And lastly, we have the appointment of Alice Roberts Davis, who will be joining the SVP or Senior Vice President team as a new Vice President for University Services. Finally, we have 3 real estate transactions for you today. One is a 10-year lease for clinical space for the West Bank located in the Fairview facilities. I want to acknowledge that the impetus for this lease is a generous gift from the Blythe Brendan Foundation that will launch and sustain the Blythe Brendan Children's Clinical Research Center, which will ensure a safe, comfortable, and convenient environment for children and families who participate in clinical research studies. The gift will cover all costs associated with the creation and ongoing infrastructure support for the center. The last 2 real estate items are for the acquisitions of a 78 acre parcel and a 150 acre parcel in Mower County as we continue our efforts to assemble a total of 1,600 acres to support the farm program. These transactions would bring us to a total of 1,056 acres. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
So before I invite a motion to recommend approval of the consent report, you are welcome to ask questions, make comments, or ask for an item to be separated out from the report to be voted on separately. Are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate an item out?
Mr. Shea. Gully.
Yes.
Just one question. The land that we're acquiring for the farm project, what campus is that connected to?
Mr. Chair? Go ahead. What a lovely question. Thank you. So, you're about to learn about one of the most exciting projects we have, I think, at the university, and that's our farm project in Mower County. And so we have been engaged in working with the Hormel Foundation has provided a $60 million gift for us to match in the development of a new farm campus for the Advanced Agricultural Research Center down there that we will be working with the Riverland Community College in terms of developing some of their opportunities for workforce development. But this will really take agricultural research to an entirely new level. But one of the conditions of the support from the Hormel Foundation is that it be done in Mower County. So that's where we've been gathering this information and these acres to put them together for several sites. I think it's Assistant Vice President Krieger still here. So we can give you a more detailed description about these particular sites and what they are, but they are part of our acquisition of and development of the farm project of the future.
Okay, thank you.
Assistant Vice President Kruger.
Oh, Chair Hipsch, Regent Gully, I was just going to add that in terms of the facilities that, as Senior Vice President Franz noted, that and the partnership with Riverland Community College, that it will include outreach and engagement facilities as well as research facilities for swine, poultry, and beef and dairy cattle. And so from that perspective, it really is consolidating our research functions for agricultural research across the state in terms of our animal research facilities, addressing some of the facility condition issues that we have in some of our other outreach centers, as well as then thinking about it holistically from a soil and water and crop health perspective as well.
So,
Just go ahead. Could you just mention, I mean, we bought how many parcels already for this project?
Regent Hipsch, or Chair Hipsch, Regent Gully, we have been working to acquire property, as Senior Vice President Franz noted, 1,600 acres. We're over halfway there now. Our previous presentations to the board have been more robust in terms of the review and action of the different parcels that we have had under consideration. And it was at this meeting that we moved them to the consent agenda because I was getting a little boring in terms of the presentation. That was the same presentation over and over again related to the different parcels. And so we just closed on one of the parcels within the last 2 weeks, and we're scheduled to close on another parcel next week, and then, or actually tomorrow, and then some of the other parcels will be coming up later this year for closing.
Mr. Chair, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dean Bohr, and we should arrange for a session for you and Dean Bohr and all of us around here, because he's the Dean of the College of Food and Agriculture and Natural Sciences. CFANS is where this is all coming from, so it's really an outgrowth of the work that we do on the St. Paul campus.
Oh, okay, great. That's kind of what I was trying to figure out. So is it going to be, if I can ask sort of a follow-up / extension to that question, so is it going to be students from the St. Paul camp? I heard Riverland Community College. Is it going to also be students from the St. Paul campus who are working in these, like on this land? Is it going to be students from, who's going to be there?
Mr. Chair, Regent, it's a combination. I mean, there'll be a lot of University of Minnesota students down there doing their research and work on the running the farm and doing the research and teaching. That'll be down there. But also we wanted to connect with Minnesota State as part of the workforce development so that the Riverland Community College can participate in some of those development opportunities for more jobs locally too.
Sounds great, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for answering my questions. And you know, we're just getting up to speed. So,
Well, and that's I mean, we just got elected couple weeks ago, and so it's been
9 days, I think.
Yeah, okay. This is I think it's what, a $260 million project total when it's all said and done. So it's a huge project, and hopefully we get you guys on board on it soon. So.
Thank you.
Okay, did you want to separate it out, or did you just leave it in?
No, I feel like my questions were
Okay,
answered. I
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
So, see where I am on my agenda here. So, so is there a motion to recommend approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? And a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay. And informational items. Senior Vice President Franz, anything to highlight?
I would just like to mention in the information items that you'll see in the report on sustainability, you saw the progress report there, but that is actually a mandated report, monthly or a yearly report that we pulled out of the information items to put in that report because it made sense to have all the climate action plan and the sustainability report together. But that is, just so you know, that's one of the items that will show up periodically. We have mandated reports, and that was one of them. The only other thing I would mention, there's a land disposition notice for the Southern Research and Outreach Center. We have a request from a landowner, adjacent landowner, that the property, because of the realignment of Highway 14 has occurred, our acreage to be separated and contiguously from ours. So we're trying to work on a swap of land down there that we think would be beneficial to the landowner and to us. So we just wanted to provide notice for that. But that's all I have.
Thank you, Vice President Franz. And that being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. And next time I'll try to get a little bit better at this.
That's great. We got it.